7 days before Christmas, the Grandview shopping center was less of a marketplace and more of a combat zone wrapped in tinsel. The air was thick with the scent of burnt cinnamon almonds and the overwhelming, cloying perfume of 1,000 desperate shoppers. For Vanessa Grant, navigating the crushing tide of bodies wasn't about finding the perfect gift. It was a tactical exercise in survival. She gripped 5-year-old Lily's small, mitten-clad hand with a ferocity that made her own knuckles ache, her eyes darting not toward the glittering display windows, but toward the exits, the shadows between kiosks, and the faces of every man who stood roughly 6 feet tall with a jagged gait. It had been 3 months since they had moved to this side of the city. 3 months of sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and boiled cabbage. 3 months of silence. But silence, in Vanessa's experience, was rarely a sign of peace. It was usually the deep intake of breath before the scream. Daniel was out there somewhere, a ghost haunting the edges of her periphery, and every time a stranger bumped her shoulder or a loud laugh erupted near the food court, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Mommy, look, the line is moving." Lily's voice was a bright, chiming bell in the low roar of the crowd. She tugged on Vanessa's arm, her eyes wide, and reflecting the golden lights of the massive tree that towered over the central atrium. Vanessa forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her soul, but served to keep her daughter from sensing the terror vibrating under her skin. "I see it, baby. Just a little longer." They had been standing in the snaking queue for Santa's village for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of exposure in an open space. It went against every instinct Vanessa had honed over the last 2 years of dodging phone calls and changing locks. But Lily had been begging for this. She had seen the commercial on the tiny television in the hospital waiting room while Vanessa finished her shift. And for the last week, it was all she spoke about. Vanessa couldn't give her daughter a bicycle. She couldn't give her the tablet the other kids at kindergarten talked about. She couldn't even guarantee a turkey dinner. But she could give her 5 minutes with a man in a fake beard and a candy cane. It was free, and right now, free was the only currency Vanessa had left. She adjusted the collar of her worn beige coat, trying to hide the fraying hem of her nurse's scrubs underneath. She hadn't had time to change. Every minute not spent working or commuting was spent watching Lily. She checked her watch, a cheap digital thing she'd bought at a pharmacy. They had 20 minutes before they had to leave to avoid the parking garage surge pricing. "Next!" the elf-costumed teenager shouted, looking bored out of his mind. They shuffled forward. Vanessa scanned the atrium again. Her gaze lingered on the upper level, where the glass railings offered a vantage point for anyone looking down. She saw 2 security guards leaning against a pillar, looking relaxed, almost lazy. Their presence offered zero comfort. Mall security was there to stop shoplifters, not furious ex-husbands with a gambling debt and a penchant for using his fists when the odds didn't go his way. "Mommy, do you think he knows?" Lily whispered, pulling Vanessa's attention back to the ground level. "Knows what, sweetie? That I've been good. I made my bed every day this week. Even when it was cold." Vanessa's throat tightened. The heating in their apartment was spotty at best, and Lily slept in 2 layers of pajamas. "He knows, Lil. Santa knows everything." As they rounded the final bend of the velvet ropes, Vanessa felt a strange sensation, a prickling at the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the drafty automatic doors. It was the feeling of being watched. Not the casual glance of a passerby, but the heavy, focused weight of a predator's attention. She spun around, her eyes wide, scanning the sea of heads behind her. A mother wrestling a stroller, a group of teenagers laughing at a phone, an elderly couple sharing a pretzel. Nothing. No Daniel. She exhaled, a shaky, jagged breath. "You're paranoid," she told herself. "He doesn't know where you are. You're just tired. You're exhausted and you're hungry, and you're seeing monsters where there are only shoppers." But the feeling didn't leave. It intensified. Above them, on the mezzanine level that was technically closed for renovations, Luca Santoro stood perfectly still. He wasn't leaning against the railing like the hired security. He stood with the posture of a man who owned the railing, the floor, the building, and the air circulating inside it. His black wool coat was tailored to perfection. hiding the shoulder holster that was as much a part of his daily attire as his watch. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had people to handle the day-to-day operations of his legitimate businesses. The Grandview Mall was just a line item in the Santoro portfolio, a way to wash money through high-volume retail leases. But something had drawn him out of his office today. A restlessness that the spreadsheets couldn't cure. He had come down to inspect the holiday traffic, to ensure the security protocols were being followed by the incompetent firm his cousin had hired. Then he had seen her. At first, he hadn't recognized the woman in the faded coat. Her hair, once a vibrant blonde that caught the sun during recess, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, the color dulled by lack of care. Her posture was different too. Hunched, protective, tense. But then she had turned, scanning the crowd, and he saw the profile, the nose with the slight upturn, the sharp jawline, the specific curve of her ear. Vanessa Grant. The name hit him like a physical blow, dragging up memories he had buried under 15 years of violence and power. High school. The cafeteria. He had been the pariah, the son of the alleged mob boss, carrying the weight of crimes he hadn't yet committed, but was destined to inherit. Other students avoided him, fearing the contagion of his reputation. Vanessa hadn't. She had sat across from him in chemistry, asking to borrow a pen, making jokes about the teacher's toupee, treating him like a human being instead of a walking crime scene. She was the only bright spot in a gray, violent adolescence, and now she looked like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. Luca's dark brown eyes narrowed as he tracked her movement. She looked thin, too thin. The coat swallowed her frame, but not enough to hide the sharp angles of her shoulders. And the child. There was a child. A little girl clinging to her hand, a miniature copy of Vanessa, beaming with an innocence that the mother clearly no longer possessed. "Sir?" The head of security, a man named Bruno, stepped up beside him. "We have a situation near the south entrance. A drunk is harassing customers." "Handle it," Luca said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the noise, yet commanded instant obedience. "And Bruno? Tell the Santa setup to stop rushing the line. They're moving cattle, not children." "Yes, sir." Bruno left, but Luca didn't move. He watched Vanessa step up to the gate. He saw her check her watch again. He saw the way her hand trembled when she smoothed the little girl's hair. Why was she terrified? Vanessa Grant had been fearless. She had been the girl who stood up to the varsity quarterback when he mocked Luca's accent. What had the world done to her to extinguish that fire? Down in the atrium, it was finally their turn. "Go on, baby," Vanessa urged gently, nudging Lily forward. "Go tell him what you want." Lily hesitated for a second, awestruck by the sheer size of the golden throne and the velvet ropes. Then, gathering her courage, she marched up the little carpeted steps. The Santa was a man in his 50s with a beard that was clearly synthetic and held on by an elastic band visible behind his ears. He looked exhausted, his red suit sagging in places, his eyes glazed over from hours of listening to demands for video games and puppies. He hoisted Lily onto his knee with a grunt. "Ho, ho, ho. And what is your name, little girl?" "Lily," she piped up, her voice clear and serious. "Okay, Lily. Let's make this quick. Santa has to feed the reindeer soon. What do you want for Christmas? A doll? A bike? A pony?" He rattled off the list by rote, looking over Lily's head at the line, already mentally processing the next kid. Vanessa stood behind the velvet rope, her arms crossed tight over her chest, holding her breath. She hoped Lily would just ask for the doll she had mentioned last week, a cheap plastic thing Vanessa might be able to afford if she skipped lunch for the next 10 days. Lily looked at the Santa, her small hands clutching the fabric of his red trousers. She didn't smile. Her expression was solemn, carrying a weight no 5-year-old should understand. "I don't want toys," Lily said. The Santa blinked, looking down at her for the first time. "No toys? Are you sure? Everyone wants toys." "I want a daddy," Lily said. The chatter in the immediate area seemed to drop by several decibels. A few parents in the line chuckled nervously, thinking it was a cute, precocious joke. Vanessa froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She felt the heat rising up her neck, a mix of shame and heartbreak that threatened to choke her. "A daddy?" the Santa repeated, letting out an awkward, forced laugh. "Well, that's a nice thought, kiddo. But Santa makes toys. Maybe your mommy can help with—" "No," Lily interrupted, her voice rising with desperate insistence. "Mommy cries at night because we don't have one. The old one was bad. He yelled and he broke the plates. I want a new one. I want a daddy who is strong, and who brings food so Mommy doesn't have to drink water for dinner." The silence that fell over the Santa's village was absolute. The nervous chuckles died instantly. The parents in line looked away, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. The elf assistant stopped taking photos. The reality of Lily's words hung in the air, stripping away the commercial veneer of the holiday and exposing the raw, ugly nerve of poverty and trauma beneath. Vanessa felt like the floor was opening up. She wanted to run. She wanted to snatch Lily and sprint to the car and drive until the gas ran out. Tears pricked her eyes. Hot, humiliating tears she refused to shed in public. She noticed, Vanessa thought, devastated. She noticed I wasn't eating. The Santa looked panicked. He wasn't trained for this. He was a temp worker making minimum wage. He looked at Vanessa with a mix of pity and annoyance, silently begging her to come get her kid and stop the scene. "Look, kid," the Santa said, his voice losing the jolly affectation. "That's not how this works. Santa can't fit a dad in the sleigh. How about a coloring book?" "Elf, give her a coloring book." Lily's face crumbled. The hope that had sustained her for a week shattered. Her lower lip trembled, and big, fat tears began to spill over her cheeks. "But I was good," she whispered, broken. "You said if I was good?" "Next!" the Santa called out, trying to pivot Lily off his knee. "Come on, lady. Grab your kid." Vanessa moved to step forward, her legs feeling like lead, ready to apologize, ready to grab her shattered daughter and disappear back into the shadows where they belonged. Wait. The single word didn't come from the Santa. It didn't come from the elf. It came from behind the velvet ropes, spoken with a quiet authority that cut through the uncomfortable silence like a razor blade. Vanessa stopped. She knew that voice. It was deeper now, rougher, like gravel grinding against velvet. But she knew it. She turned slowly. Luca Santoro stepped into the light. Up close, he was devastating. The boy she remembered had been lanky and brooding. The man standing before her was a fortress. Broad shoulders strained against the fabric of a coat that likely cost more than Vanessa made in a year. His jaw was dusted with a 5 o'clock shadow, and his dark brown eyes were locked on her face with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the security guards who had suddenly straightened up, terrified. He looked only at her, analyzing, cataloging every sign of distress on her face. Then, he broke eye contact and walked straight toward the throne. He didn't ask for permission. He simply stepped over the velvet rope as if it didn't exist. "Sir, you can't be back here," the Santa began, blustering. "This is a restricted R." Luca turned his head, giving the man a single, flat look. It wasn't a glare. It was an absence of emotion so complete that it promised violence without uttering a syllable. The Santa shut his mouth with an audible click, shrinking back into his chair. Luca stopped in front of Lily. He didn't tower over her. Instead, he crouched down, ignoring the dust of the mall floor on his pristine trousers. He brought himself to her eye level, his movements deliberate and slow, like one might approach a startled bird. Lily sniffled, wiping her nose on her mitten, looking at this dark, imposing stranger with wide, wet eyes. "What is your name?" Luca asked. His voice was incredibly soft, a stark contrast to the command he had just exerted over the room. "Lily," she stammered. "Lily," Luca repeated, tasting the name. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, offering it to her. "That was a very big wish, Lily." "He said he can't do it," Lily whispered, pointing an accusing finger at the paralyzed Santa. "He said he only has toys." Luca glanced at the Santa with profound disdain, then looked back at the girl. "He is an employee. He has limited authority." Luca paused, shifting his gaze to Vanessa, who stood frozen a few feet away, her hands pressed over her mouth. "But I don't." He turned back to the child. "You said you want a daddy who is strong?" Lily nodded. "And one who ensures there is always food on the table?" She nodded again, more vigorously. Luca held her gaze for a long moment. "Consider it done." A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the onlookers, but Luca ignored them all. He stood up, his full height returning, and turned to the display case that stood behind the Santa's throne. A glass box containing the grand prize of the mall's holiday raffle. It was a handcrafted porcelain dollhouse, fully furnished, accompanied by a limited edition doll that was nearly as tall as Lily. It was the kind of toy that rich parents bought raffle tickets for, but never expected to win. Luca gestured to the floor manager who had come running over, sweating profusely. "Open it." "Mr. Santoro," the manager squeaked. "That's the raffle prize. The drawing isn't until the 24th. We can't just—" "Open it." Luca didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The manager fumbled with his keys, hands shaking, and unlocked the case. Luca reached in, bypassing the small accessories, and lifted the massive, beautiful doll. He turned and handed it to Lily. The doll was almost too big for her to hold, but she grabbed it with both arms, her mouth falling open in shock. "Wish granted," Luca said. "Luca." Vanessa finally found her voice. It was a rasp, weak and trembling. "You can't. We can't accept this. It's too much." Luca closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell the scent of expensive sandalwood and rain on his coat. The proximity was overwhelming. It radiated heat and safety in a way that terrified her, because she knew how dangerous it was to rely on it. "Vanessa," he said. The way he said her name, like it was a prayer he hadn't spoken in years, sent a shiver down her spine. "You aren't accepting charity. You're accepting a correction of an error." "I don't understand," she breathed, looking up into his dark eyes. They were the same eyes she had seen across a chemistry lab table 15 years ago, but harder now, flinty. "You will," he said. He looked around at the crowd, which was now openly staring, phones raised, recording the scene. His expression hardened. He didn't like her being exposed like this. He didn't like the way the crowd looked at her, like a tragedy on display. He placed a hand on the small of her back. The touch was firm, possessive, and electric. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. "We're leaving. My car is in the south garage." Vanessa protested weakly, though her feet were already turning to follow him. I have a shift tomorrow. I can't just—" "Your car is irrelevant," Luca said, steering her away from the gawking Santa and the line of parents. He gestured to Lily, who was clutching the giant doll like a lifeline, trotting to keep up with them. "And you're not going to the south garage." "Why?" Vanessa asked, panic flaring again. "Luca, what are you doing?" He leaned in closer, his lips brushing her ear so that only she could hear him over the festive music. "Because I saw the way you were watching the exits, Vanessa. I saw how you checked the shadows." He pulled back to look her in the eye. "You're running from something. And as of 30 seconds ago, you stopped running." Vanessa felt the air leave her lungs. He saw everything. Mr. Santoro, Bruno, the security chief, appeared at his elbow, looking nervous. "The crowd is getting curious. Do you want me to clear a path?" "No need," Luca said, his hand remaining firmly on Vanessa's back, guiding her and Lily toward the private service corridors that bypassed the public exits. "We're taking the executive elevator." As they walked away from the Santa's village, leaving a confused silence in their wake, Vanessa glanced back one last time. The fake Santa was staring at them with his mouth open. The poverty and the shame that had weighed on her shoulders for months felt different now. They hadn't vanished, but they had been displaced by something heavier and far more volatile. She looked at the man beside her, the boy she had once defended, who had grown into a man who commanded entire buildings with a whisper. He hadn't asked if she needed help. He hadn't asked why she was poor or where her husband was. He had just stepped into the chaos and ordered it to stop. "Luca," she whispered again, as the steel doors of the service elevator slid open, revealing a plush, mirrored interior that looked nothing like the rest of the mall. "You didn't have to do that." He ushered Lily inside, then followed Vanessa, pressing the button for the roof. As the doors slid shut, sealing them in quiet, airtight luxury, he looked at her. His eyes swept over her frayed coat, her tired face, and the defensive set of her shoulders. "I didn't do it for you," he lied smoothly, though his eyes betrayed him. He looked at Lily, who was busy inspecting the lace on the doll's dress. "I did it because nobody tells a child that hunger is her fault." Vanessa swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to argue, to maintain some shred of independence, but the exhaustion was a physical weight dragging her down. She leaned back against the mirrored wall, her reflection showing a woman on the edge of collapse standing next to a man made of stone and expensive wool. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "My car," Luca replied, unbuttoning his coat as the elevator rose smoothly. "And then, somewhere where you don't have to check the exits." The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival at the rooftop parking level. It was a private zone, far away from the chaotic public garages below. The wind howled as the doors opened, carrying snowflakes that swirled into the warmth of the cabin. Vanessa stepped out into the cold, the biting wind whipping her loose strands of hair across her face. She shivered violently, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. Luca noticed. Without a word, he shrugged off his heavy wool coat. Before she could protest, he draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. It enveloped her completely, falling to her knees. "Luca, you'll freeze," she said, looking at him in just his suit jacket and crisp white shirt. "I don't feel the cold," he said simply. He walked toward a massive black SUV parked alone under a floodlight, its engine already humming, exhaust pluming white smoke into the night air. Vanessa clutched the lapels of his coat, watching him walk ahead to open the door for Lily. She looked at her daughter, who was smiling for the first time in months. She looked at the man who had just rewritten their Christmas with a single command. She didn't know what the price of this rescue would be. In Luca's world, everything had a price. She remembered that much from the rumors in high school. But as she watched him gently help Lily into the booster seat that shouldn't have been there but somehow seemed to fit the narrative of his preparedness, Vanessa realized she didn't care about the cost. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one standing between her daughter and the world. Someone else was standing in front of them. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the icy air, and walked toward the car. The shopping mall below them continued its frantic, noisy existence. But up here, in the shadow of Luca Santoro, the silence wasn't terrifying. It was heavy. It was absolute. And for the first time, it felt like a wall rather than a void. The week before Christmas had started with a wish. She just hoped she could survive the granting of it. "Get in, Vanessa," Luca said, holding the rear door open for her, his dark eyes unreadable against the snowy backdrop. She climbed in. The door shut with a solid, reassuring thud, locking out the wind, the cold, and the past. Or so she thought. She didn't know that the past was waiting for them at the exit gate, ready to test just how strong this new protection really was. But for this moment, in the leather-scented warmth of the SUV, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe. The interior of the SUV was a sealed capsule of silence and leather, a stark contrast to the biting wind that had been whipping across the rooftop just seconds before. The heating system was already humming, pushing warm, filtered air against Vanessa's frozen cheeks. But the chill nestled deep in her bones refused to dissipate. She sat stiffly on the edge of the plush seat, the oversized wool coat Luca had draped over her shoulders pooling around her like a protective fortress. Beside her, Lily was already entranced by the ambient lighting of the vehicle, her small fingers tracing the stitching on the armrest. The massive doll from the mall clutched tightly to her chest as if she feared it might evaporate if she let go. "My car," Vanessa murmured, the reality of the situation piercing through the haze of shock. She leaned forward slightly, looking toward the driver's seat where Luca had settled in with a fluid, commanding grace. "Luca, I can't just leave it. It's a piece of junk, I know, but it's the only way I can get to work. My nursing bag is in the trunk, my ID badge." Luca glanced at her through the rearview mirror. His dark brown eyes were calm, unreadable pools that absorbed the panic radiating from her without reflecting it back. He didn't turn the ignition key immediately. Instead, his gaze shifted to the dashboard, his fingers drumming a slow, rhythmic beat on the leather steering wheel. "Where is it parked?" he asked. His voice was low, vibrating through the quiet cabin. It wasn't a question of whether she needed the car. It was a logistical inquiry. "Section D near the ramp," Vanessa replied, her voice trembling. "It's the silver sedan with the dented bumper." Without a word, Luca started the engine. The powerful vehicle purred to life, a beast waking up, and began to glide silently across the snow-dusted concrete of the rooftop lot. Vanessa watched the rows of cars pass by, her heart rate spiking with every shadow that stretched across the pavement. She knew this was irrational. She was inside a tank of a car with a man who terrified the rest of the city. But trauma didn't understand logic. Trauma told her that safety was a lie, and that the moment she lowered her guard, the blow would come. As they rounded the corner toward Section D, the headlights of the SUV swept across the concrete, illuminating the swirling snowflakes and the rows of parked vehicles. Vanessa spotted her car instantly. It was a sad, rusted thing, a relic of a life that had been falling apart for years. It sat alone near a concrete pillar, isolated from the nicer vehicles, looking abandoned. But it wasn't alone. Vanessa's breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, strangled sound that made Lily look up from her doll. "Mommy?" Lily whispered. Vanessa couldn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the figure standing by the driver's side door of her sedan. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that had seen better days, frantic energy radiating off him even from this distance. He was trying to force a wire coat hanger through the seal of her window, his movements jerky and aggressive. "Daniel, he found us," Vanessa whispered, the blood draining from her face so fast she felt dizzy. "Oh God, he found us. How did he know? I didn't tell anyone where we were going." Daniel looked worse than he had the last time she saw him. He was thinner, his face gaunt, illuminated by the harsh glare of the parking lot lights. But the desperation in his posture was familiar. It was the desperation of a man who had lost everything at the tables and needed someone to bleed to make himself feel powerful again. Luca stopped the SUV about 20 feet away. He didn't turn off the engine. He didn't look surprised. He looked at Daniel with the same detached clinical interest a scientist might have for a cockroach scuttling across a clean floor. "Stay here," Luca said. The command was absolute. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the sound loud in the tense silence. "Luca, don't!" Vanessa reached out, her hand hovering near his shoulder but not daring to touch the expensive fabric of his suit. He's erratic. He might have a knife. He gets crazy when he's like this. Just drive. Please, just drive away." Luca turned in his seat, looking at her fully, his expression softened by a fraction of a degree. But the steel behind it remained. "Lock the doors behind me, Vanessa." "Luca." "Lock the doors." He opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The wind caught his suit jacket, but he didn't seem to notice. He closed the door firmly, and Vanessa, operating on autopilot, immediately hit the lock button. The heavy thud of the locks engaging echoed through the car. She scrambled across the seat to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass, watching the scene unfold like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Daniel hadn't noticed the SUV yet. He was too focused on his assault on the old sedan, cursing loudly, kicking the tire in frustration. The metal of the coat hanger snapped, and he screamed a string of obscenities that Vanessa could hear, even through the insulated glass of Luca's car. Luca walked toward him. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked with a predatory smoothness, his hands loose at his sides, his footsteps silent on the snow. He was a shadow detaching itself from the dark, moving with lethal intent. Daniel spun around only when Luca was 10 feet away. The sudden appearance of a man like Luca, tall, broad, radiating wealth and violence, startled him. Daniel stumbled back against the sedan, his eyes widening. For a second, confusion reigned. He looked at Luca, then at the SUV, and then recognition dawned on his wasted face. He didn't recognize Luca Santoro, the mafia boss. He recognized a rich man standing between him and his target. "Get lost, pal," Daniel sneered, trying to summon bravado. He straightened up, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "This is a private dispute. Walk away before you get hurt." Vanessa flinched. She wanted to scream at Daniel to run, not to save him, but because she knew what happened when people threatened Luca Santoro. She had heard the stories in high school, the rumors of what happened to the boys who keyed his car or insulted his family. Luca didn't speak. He stopped 5 feet from Daniel, his stillness unnerving. He was perfectly calm, a statue carved from obsidian. "I said beat it!" Daniel shouted, pushing himself off the car. He reached into his pocket. Vanessa's heart stopped. She pulled Lily's head down into her lap, covering the girl's eyes. "Don't look, baby. Don't look. Is Daddy there?" Lily asked, her voice muffled against Vanessa's jeans. "No." Vanessa choked out. "Just stay down." She looked back out the window. Daniel hadn't pulled a knife. He had pulled out a screwdriver, brandishing it like a weapon. It was pathetic. Against a normal man, it might have been terrifying. Against Luca, it looked like a child's toy. Luca looked at the screwdriver, then up at Daniel's face. He finally spoke. Vanessa couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shape of them. Brief, cold, final. Daniel lunged. It happened so fast that Vanessa barely registered the movement. One moment Daniel was thrusting the screwdriver forward, screaming something incoherent. The next, he was airborne. Luca didn't just dodge. He stepped inside the attack, his movement a blur of efficiency. He caught Daniel's wrist, the one holding the weapon, and twisted. Even through the glass, Vanessa imagined she heard the snap. Daniel's scream was audible this time. It was a high, thin sound of agony. The screwdriver clattered to the pavement. Luca didn't stop. He didn't strike Daniel with a closed fist. He didn't dirty his knuckles. He simply used Daniel's own momentum and the leverage of the broken wrist to spin him around and slam him face first into the hood of the sedan. The impact shook the old car. Dust flew up from the rusty metal. Daniel crumpled, his legs giving out, but Luca held him pinned there with one hand on the back of his neck, forcing his face into the cold metal. Vanessa was shaking uncontrollably. She had feared Daniel for 2 years. She had spent nights awake, terrified of his footsteps in the hall, and Luca had dismantled him in 3 seconds. It wasn't a fight. It was a correction. Luca leaned down, bringing his mouth close to Daniel's ear. He was speaking again. Vanessa watched Daniel's struggles cease instantly. The man who had terrorized her, who had stolen her savings and bruised her ribs, went completely still, paralyzed by whatever Luca was whispering to him. After a long moment, Luca released him. He stepped back, straightening his cuffs, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his jacket. Daniel slid off the hood of the car, clutching his broken wrist to his chest. He was sobbing now, sliding down to his knees in the slush. He looked up at Luca, not with anger, but with the pure, unadulterated terror of a man who has looked into the abyss and seen something looking back. Luca pointed a single finger toward the ramp of the parking garage. "Leave." Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't look at the SUV. He didn't look for Vanessa. He scrambled to his feet, slipping on the ice, and ran. He ran like the devil himself was snapping at his heels, disappearing into the darkness of the stairwell without looking back once. Vanessa let out a breath she felt she had been holding for an hour. Her entire body sagged against the door. He was gone. Just like that. Luca stood by the empty car for a moment, watching the spot where Daniel had vanished. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. His demeanor hadn't changed. He didn't look winded. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had just taken out the trash. He opened the driver's side door and slid back in, bringing a gust of cold air with him. The atmosphere in the car shifted instantly. The silence was heavier now, charged with the violence that had just occurred. "Luca," Vanessa started, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you? Did you kill him? Are you crazy?" Luca turned to look at her. His eyes were devoid of the darkness she expected. They were calm. He looked past her to Lily, who was still hiding in Vanessa's lap. "Is she okay?" he asked. Vanessa looked down, stroking Lily's hair. "I think so." She didn't see anything. "Good." Luca put the car in gear. "What did you do to him?" Vanessa asked, finding her courage. "Luca, you broke his arm. The police. The cameras in this garage have been malfunctioning for a week, and the company that's supposed to fix them answers to me," Luca said smoothly, pulling the SUV away from her sedan. And the police are not going to be called. Daniel isn't going to the police. He's going to find a hole to crawl into, and he's going to stay there. You don't know him, Vanessa argued weakly, though her conviction was fading. He's desperate. He owes money to bad people, Luca. He came for me because he thinks I have money hidden away. He won't stop. Luca navigated the SUV down the spiral ramp of the parking garage, his movements precise and controlled. He will stop, Luca corrected her, because he doesn't owe money to bad people anymore. He owes it to me. Vanessa froze. She stared at the side of his profile, illuminated by the passing streetlights. What? $50,000, Luca said, as casually as if he were discussing the price of the doll in the back seat. That's the principal sum plus the vigorish he racked up with the Calabrese brothers in Jersey. I bought his note this morning. You paid his debt? Vanessa felt the room spinning. $50,000. It was an impossible sum. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life. Why? Why would you do that? Luca brought the car to a stop at the exit gate. He turned to her fully now, his expression intense. I didn't pay it for him, Vanessa. I bought the debt. That means I own the debt. And by extension, I own him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, tapping one out but not lighting it, just rolling it between his fingers as a nervous tic he seemed to be suppressing. As long as he owes me that money, Luca continued, his voice dropping an octave, he is property, and my property does not touch what belongs to me. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. What belongs to me? He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about her, about Lily. We aren't property, Luca, Vanessa whispered, a flash of her old spirit returning. We aren't things you can buy to settle a score. No, Luca agreed softly. He looked at her with a strange sadness in his eyes that confused her more than his violence. You aren't property. You are collateral damage of a life you didn't choose. And I am removing you from the blast radius. He accelerated, merging onto the highway that led toward the skyline of the city, toward the glittering towers where men like Luca lived above the clouds. My car, Vanessa said, realizing they were leaving it behind. My scrubs, my ID, I'll have someone pick it up tonight, Luca dismissed. They'll clean it, service it, and bring your things to the penthouse. But you won't be driving that death trap again. Penthouse? Vanessa asked, gripping the door handle. Luca, I can't go to your penthouse. I have a job. I have a shift at 7 a.m. I have a life, messy as it is. You have a stalker who just tried to break into your car with a screwdriver, Luca countered. You have a child who asked Santa for food. Your life is currently a target practice for disaster. You are coming with me. Tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss your shift. Tonight you sleep somewhere where the doors lock properly. Vanessa looked back at Lily. The little girl had sat up now that the car was moving. She was looking out the window at the city lights, clutching the doll. She looked peaceful. She didn't look like a child who was afraid of hunger or angry fathers. Vanessa slumped back against the seat. She was too tired to fight him. And God help her, a part of her. The part that had been carrying the weight of the world for 2 years. Didn't want to fight him. She wanted to let him take the wheel. She wanted to believe that the steel in his voice could actually keep the monsters away. Just for tonight, Vanessa murmured, more to herself than to him. Just for tonight, Luca lied. She knew he was lying. He knew she knew, but neither of them called it out. The drive was silent after that. The city blurred past them, a streak of neon and shadow. Vanessa watched Luca's hands on the steering wheel. They were large, strong hands. There was no blood on them. No sign of the violence he had just inflicted. He drove with a gentle touch, adjusting the climate control when he heard Lily sneeze in the back seat. The duality of him was dizzying. The monster who broke bones without blinking, and the man who turned up the heat for a child he barely knew. They arrived at his building 20 minutes later. It wasn't just an apartment building. It was a glass needle piercing the sky, a fortress of wealth and exclusion. The valet rushed to open the door before the SUV even came to a complete stop. Mr. Santoro, the valet said, bowing his head. He looked at Vanessa and the child with surprise, but masked it quickly. Shall I take the bags? Leave them, Luca said. He stepped out and came around to Vanessa's side. offering her his hand. She looked at it. It was a crossroads. Taking his hand meant stepping into his world. It meant accepting that she was no longer just Vanessa Grant, nurse and single mother. It meant becoming something else. Something protected. Something kept. She looked at Lily, who was already scrambling out of the car, clutching the doll. "Wow," Lily breathed, looking up at the building. "It touches the moon." Luca smiled, a real small smile that transformed his harsh face. "Almost, Piccolina?" "Little one, almost." Vanessa took his hand. His grip was warm and firm. He pulled her out of the car, and for a moment she stumbled, her legs weak from the adrenaline crash. He caught her instantly, his arm going around her waist to steady her. He held her there for a beat longer than necessary, his body a solid wall of heat against hers. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "You can stop shaking now, Vanessa. I've got you." They walked into the lobby, a cavern of marble and gold. The concierge nodded respectfully. They entered the private elevator that required a biometric scan of Luca's hand to open. As they ascended, the pressure in Vanessa's ears popped, marking the altitude. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, Vanessa gasped. It was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city covered in snow. It was beautiful, cold, and immaculate. It looked like a museum, not a home. "Make yourselves comfortable," Luca said, closing the elevator doors behind them, sealing them in. "I'll order food." "Lily, what do you like? Pizza? Pasta?" "Pizza!" Lily shouted, her fear completely forgotten in the face of luxury and the promise of food. "Pizza it is," Luca said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Vanessa stood in the middle of the living room, still wearing his coat. She felt like an imposter. She felt like she had stepped through the looking glass. But as she watched Luca Santoro, the most dangerous man she knew, kneel down to show Lily how to turn on the massive television, she realized that the danger wasn't inside this room. The danger was out there, in the cold, with Daniel and the debts and the hunger. In here, there was only warmth. And for the first time in a very long time, Vanessa allowed herself to unclench her fists. She was safe. She didn't know for how long, and she didn't know the price. But tonight, she was safe. "Mommy, look!" Lily pointed at the screen. "Cartoons!" Vanessa smiled. A genuine, tired smile. She walked over to the massive sectional sofa and sat down. Luca finished his call and looked at her from across the room. Their eyes met. There was a history there, unspoken and heavy, spanning from the chemistry lab of their youth to this glass castle in the sky. "Thank you," she mouthed. Luca nodded once, a sharp, singular motion. He didn't say, "You're welcome." He didn't say, "It's nothing." He just turned and walked toward the kitchen, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, revealing the powerful forearms that had built an empire and broken a man's wrist for her sake. The night was just beginning, and Vanessa had the sinking feeling that her life had just been irrevocably altered. She wasn't just a guest here. She was the reason the king had come down from his tower. And kings, she knew, rarely let their prizes go. But as she watched Lily laugh at the cartoon, belly full of the promise of pizza, Vanessa decided that maybe, just maybe, being a prize was better than being a victim. She pulled Luca's coat tighter around herself, inhaling his scent, and let the city lights blur into a sea of stars below them. The past was at the gate, yes. But the gate was locked, and Luca Santoro held the key. The silence in the penthouse was not the empty, terrifying silence Vanessa had grown accustomed to over the last 2 years. It was not the silence of holding one's breath, waiting for a key to turn in a lock or a heavy footstep to creak on a floorboard. This was a heavy, expensive silence. It smelled of polished mahogany, fresh linen, and the faint, grounding scent of espresso that seemed to permeate the air regardless of the time of day. 2 days had passed since Luca Santoro had pulled her out of the snow and into his fortress in the sky. 48 hours. To Vanessa, it felt like a lifetime had been compressed into those minutes. Lily was sleeping in a room that was larger than their entire previous apartment, surrounded by so many pillows she looked like a princess in a storybook. And Vanessa was standing in a kitchen that cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes, staring at a stainless steel refrigerator as if it were an alien artifact. She tightened the sash of the silk robe that had been left in her room. It was navy blue, soft as water against her skin, and it made her feel like an imposter. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't be comfortable. Comfort was a trap. Comfort made you slow, and being slow got you hurt. "I have to do something," she whispered to herself, the sound of her own voice startling her in the quiet morning light. She couldn't pay him. The thought of the $50,000 he had spent to buy Daniel's debt sat on her chest like a concrete block. She couldn't give him money, but she could be useful. She could prove that she wasn't a leech, just another person taking from him. She opened the refrigerator. It was stocked with military precision. Rows of organic eggs, imported cheeses, cartons of milk, fresh berries, and vegetables that looked like they had been polished before being shelved. She grabbed the eggs, the flour, the milk. She found a heavy ceramic bowl and a whisk. Cooking. She could do cooking. It was mechanical, rhythmic, and safe. She began to whisk the batter, the repetitive clink, clink, clink of the metal against the ceramic serving as an anchor for her racing thoughts. She was safe here. Daniel was gone. Luca had said so. But why did she feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop? Why did she feel like every bite of food she ate was adding to a tab she could never settle? She was so focused on the swirl of flour and milk that she didn't hear him enter. Luca didn't walk. He materialized. One moment the room was empty, and the next, the air pressure shifted, becoming charged and heavy. "You are not staff, Vanessa." His voice was rough with sleep, a low rumble that vibrated through the marble floor and straight up her spine. Vanessa jumped, nearly dropping the bowl. She spun around, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Luca was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, watching her. He looked different in the morning light. The armor of the three-piece suit was gone, replaced by dark gray sweatpants and a fitted black t-shirt that clung to his chest and arms. His hair was messy, stripped of the severe styling gel, falling over his forehead in a way that made him look younger. Dangerous, yes, but human. I know, Vanessa stammered, gripping the whisk like a weapon. "I just wanted to make breakfast, to say thank you. You have all this food, and the housekeeper hasn't come yet, so I thought—" "The housekeeper comes at 9, Luca interrupted, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her. "And you are not here to cook for me. You are here to rest." "I can't just rest, Luca," she argued, turning back to the stove to pour the batter onto the hot griddle. "I'm not a porcelain doll. You've given us so much in 2 days. Let me make pancakes. It's the least I can do." Luca stopped right behind her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to smell the soap he used, something clean and sharp like cedar. He reached out, his hand large and warm, and covered hers where she gripped the handle of the pan. He didn't take it from her. He just stopped her movement. "The least you can do," he murmured, his breath brushing the top of her head, "is stop acting like you owe me a debt. Debts are for business. This is not business." Vanessa froze. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. "It feels like a debt," she whispered, her voice trembling. $50,000, the clothes, this place. I don't know how to be this. I don't know how to be a guest in a life I can't afford. I keep waiting for the bill, Luca. Because there is always a bill." He gently took the spatula from her hand and set it on the counter. Then, with a pressure that was firm but incredibly gentle, he turned her around to face him. His dark eyes searched hers, stripping away her defenses with terrifying efficiency. "Do you remember 11th grade?" he asked suddenly. Vanessa blinked, thrown off balance by the change in subject. "What?" "11th grade, Mr. Henderson's chemistry class. 2nd semester." A faint, confused smile touched Vanessa's lips. "I remember. You blew up a beaker. You put too much potassium in the solution." "I did," Luca acknowledged, a hint of amusement dancing in his dark eyes, softening the hard lines of his face. And everyone laughed. The jocks, the cheerleaders, even the teacher made a joke about explosive personalities. They all laughed at the clumsy mob kid. Everyone except you. Vanessa looked down at his chest, unable to hold the intensity of his gaze. You had glass in your hand. You were bleeding. It didn't seem funny to me. You came over, Luca continued, his voice dropping to a hush that made the vast kitchen feel very small. You ignored the teacher telling everyone to stay back. You took my hand. You pulled out the shard of glass and you wrapped it with a tissue from your pocket. You asked if I was okay. You didn't look at me like I was a monster or a criminal in training. You looked at me like I was just a boy who was hurt. He placed a finger under her chin, tilting her head up until she was forced to look at him again. The morning sun caught the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. That was the first time anyone outside my family had touched me with kindness, he said, the confession raw and heavy. I watched you for 2 years after that. I saw you walk through the halls trying to be invisible, hiding behind your books. But you were never invisible to me. You were the only color in a gray world, Vanessa. Vanessa's breath hitched. She had assumed he helped her in the mall because he was powerful and she was pathetic, a charity case to make himself feel benevolent. She hadn't realized that she had been carrying a piece of his history with her all this time. I knew who you were, she admitted softly. Everyone said to stay away from the Santoro kid. They said your family was dangerous. They said you would hurt anyone who got too close. I was dangerous, Luca said simply. I am dangerous. Not to me, she countered, the realization surprising her as she spoke it. You were never dangerous to me. No, he agreed, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, a touch so light it felt like a ghost. Never to you. The moment hung suspended in time, fragile and beautiful. Vanessa felt a pull toward him, a magnetic force that defied all logic. She was a struggling nurse with a chaotic past. He was a kingpin who ruled the city from the shadows. But in this kitchen, with the smell of pancakes and coffee, none of that seemed to matter. Mommy, pancakes! The spell shattered as Lily came bounding into the kitchen, clutching her giant doll by one arm. She was wearing a pair of pajamas Luca had ordered for her, soft pink flannel with clouds on them. She looked rested, her cheeks flushed with sleep, the dark circles under her eyes fading. Luca stepped back instantly, creating a respectable distance between them, but the warmth in his eyes didn't fade as he looked at the child. Good morning, Piccolina, he said, his voice shifting from intense to playful. Your mother made pancakes, but only if you wash your hands first. Okay. Lily dropped the doll on a velvet chair and scrambled toward the sink. Luca grabbed a stool and moved it over so she could reach the faucet, turning on the water for her and handing her the soap. Vanessa watched them, her heart aching in her chest. It was a domestic scene she had stopped dreaming of years ago. A father figure, a warm kitchen, safety. It was everything she wanted, and that made it terrifying. Because if she let herself want it, losing it would kill her. They ate at the kitchen island. Luca ate 3 pancakes, praising Vanessa's cooking with a seriousness that made her blush. He listened intently as Lily described a dream she had about a flying reindeer who ate pizza. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look distracted. He gave them his undivided attention, a gift more expensive than the penthouse itself. But the real world has a way of intruding on even the highest towers. As they were finishing up, a soft, urgent chime echoed through the room. Luca's expression shifted instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by the granite mask of the dawn. He pulled a phone from his pocket, not the one he used for food orders, but a sleek black device with no brand markings. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Excuse me, he said, standing up abruptly. I have to take this. Stay here. Relax. He walked out of the kitchen and down the long hallway toward his office, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a definitive click. Vanessa watched him go, a cold draft settling over her heart. The transition was jarring. 1 minute he was Luca, the boy who remembered a tissue in chemistry class. The next, he was the boss, answering a call that probably involved things she didn't want to know about. Inside the soundproof office, Luca answered the phone. Speak. We have a problem, boss. Bruno's voice came through, tense and clipped. We tossed Daniel's apartment like you asked. It's clean. Too clean. But we found something else. Or rather, someone else found it first. Luca walked behind his massive desk and stared out at the city skyline. The snow was falling again, covering the grime of the streets in white. Explain. The place was turned over before we got there, Bruno said. Professional job. They were looking for something specific. Floorboards ripped up, vents unscrewed. And we found a tag on the doorframe. A marker. Which family? Luca asked, his hand tightening around the phone until the plastic creaked. Ndrangheta, Bruno replied. The Calabrese faction. Luca cursed silently. The Ndrangheta were not low-level thugs like Daniel. They were organized, ruthless, and they were rivals of the Santoro family. They didn't care about rules, and they didn't care about collateral damage. Why are they interested in a junkie like Daniel? Luca demanded. He owed them money, yes, but you don't tear an apartment apart for cash. You break legs for cash. Tearing a place apart means you are looking for information. It's not cash, Bruno said, his voice dropping lower. Word on the street is that Daniel stole a ledger from one of their front operations 3 months ago. He thought he could blackmail them. He's been hiding it. And let me guess, Luca said, his eyes narrowing as he watched a snowflake hit the glass window. They can't find Daniel, so they think the ex-wife has it, Bruno finished. They think Vanessa knows where it is, or that she has it. We intercepted chatter on an encrypted line. They know she's with you, Luca. They know you picked her up at the mall. They think you have the ledger now. They think you made a move against them by taking her. Luca slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. This changed everything. It wasn't just about protecting Vanessa from an abusive ex anymore. She was now a pawn in a mafia war. If the Ndrangheta thought she had their secrets, they wouldn't stop until they had her. Where is Daniel? Luca asked, his voice deadly calm. In the wind. We're tracking him, but he's gone underground. He probably sold the information about Vanessa to them to buy himself time. Find him, Luca ordered. Find him and bring him to the warehouse. I want to know exactly what he stole and who he told. And Bruno? Yes, boss? Tighten the perimeter around the penthouse. I want 3 more men in the lobby and 2 on the roof. No one gets within 100 yards of this building without me knowing their blood type. Understood. Should I tell the girl? Warn her? She needs to know the threat level has changed. Luca paused. He looked at the closed door of his office. He thought about Vanessa in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, finally smiling after years of terror. He thought about how she flinched at loud noises. If he told her that a ruthless criminal organization was hunting her, the fragile peace she had found would shatter. She would panic. She might try to run to protect him or Lily. She would start looking at the exits again. No, Luca said firmly. She knows about Daniel. She thinks he is the only threat. Let her believe that. I will handle the Ndrangheta. She doesn't need to carry that weight. I will be the wall. Is that wise, Luca? If she goes out, she isn't going out, Luca said. She stays here until I wipe the Calabrese family off the map. He hung up. He stood there for a moment, adjusting his cuffs, composing his face. He had to go back out there and play the role of the benevolent protector, while silently preparing for war. When he returned to the living room, Vanessa was sitting on the sofa, folding a pile of laundry that the housekeeping staff had left. She looked up at him, her blue eyes scanning his face for danger. She was perceptive. Too perceptive. Is everything okay? She asked. Fine. Luca lied smoothly. Just business. Minor complications with a shipment at the docks. He sat down in the armchair opposite her, trying to radiate calm. Vanessa, we need to discuss the arrangements. I want you and Lily to stay inside the penthouse for the next few days. I have everything you need here. I can bring in tutors for Lily, anything you want. I have a gym, a library. You don't need to leave. Vanessa stopped folding a shirt. Her hands went still. Stay inside? For how long? Until I say it's safe, Luca said. Safe from Daniel? She asked, her brow furrowing. You said you bought his debt. You said you owned him. If he's handled, why do we need to hide? Luca mentally cursed her sharp mind. Daniel is handled, but desperate men do stupid things. I want to be sure he has left the state before you resume your routine. Vanessa bit her lip. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city she was being asked to hide from. I can't, Luca. I have a shift tomorrow at the hospital. I already called in sick for 2 days. If I don't show up tomorrow, I lose my job. I lose my seniority. I lose the only thing that is mine. I will pay you double your salary, Luca said, frustration leaking into his voice. Triple. You don't need that job. You don't need to scrub floors and deal with sick people for pennies. Vanessa turned around, her eyes flashing with a sudden fire. It's not about the money. It's about my life. For 2 years, Daniel controlled where I went, who I saw, what I spent. I clawed that job back. I fought for it. It's the one place where I'm not a victim, where I'm a nurse who saves children. If I give that up, if I just sit here in your golden tower eating your food, then I'm just trading one cage for another. The words hung in the air. One cage for another. Luca felt a sharp pang in his chest. He stood up and walked over to her. He wanted to shake her, to tell her that the cage was the only thing keeping the wolves out. But he looked at her face, the determination, the fear of losing herself, and he knew he couldn't force her. I am not Daniel, he said intensely. I am not trying to control you. I am trying to keep you alive. I know, Vanessa said, her voice softening. She reached out and touched his arm. A bold move. I know you're not him. But please, Luca, let me go to work. It's the pediatric ward. It's secure. You can have your driver take me. You can have a guard stand at the door. But let me keep my life. Please. If I hide here, Daniel wins. Fear wins. Luca looked down at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the need to retain some shred of agency. He knew, logically, that the safest place for her was in this room, but he also knew that breaking her spirit was a different kind of violence, and he was arrogant. He was Luca Santoro. He controlled this city. Surely he could protect one woman at a hospital for 8 hours. He had an army. The 'Ndrangheta wouldn't dare strike in a public hospital in broad daylight. They were shadows, not terrorists. They wanted the ledger, not a public spectacle. He made a calculation. A dangerous one. Fine, Luca said, the word feeling heavy on his tongue. You go to work tomorrow. Vanessa let out a breath of relief, her shoulders sagging. Thank you, Luca. But, he raised a finger, his expression severe. My terms. You take my car, you take my driver, and you take a shadow. A shadow? A bodyguard. He will be dressed in plain clothes. He will sit in the waiting room. He will check the exits. You do not go to the bathroom without texting him. You do not go to the cafeteria alone. If anything feels wrong, you press the panic button I will give you, and I will be there in 5 minutes with enough firepower to level the building. If the hospital's alarm starts screaming, don't stop to think. Get to the nearest stairwell and get behind a locked door. Do you understand? Vanessa nodded vigorously. I understand. I can do that. It's just the pediatric floor. It's mostly worried moms and sick kids. It's safe. It's not safe. Luca thought grimly. Nothing is safe. But he couldn't tell her that. Not without revealing the lie he had just constructed. Okay, Luca said. Tomorrow, you go to work. He watched her smile. A real, genuine smile of gratitude, and felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He was giving her what she wanted, but he was exposing her. He would have to double the guard. He would put his best men on the perimeter. I need to make some calls, Luca said, stepping back from her warmth, to arrange the security detail. Okay, Vanessa said. She hesitated, then stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. It was a chaste, quick touch, but it burned his skin like a brand. Thank you for not making me invisible again. Luca watched her walk back to the couch to sit with Lily. He touched his cheek where her lips had brushed his skin. He walked back to his office, his mind racing with tactical layouts of the hospital. He would burn the world down before he let anything happen to her. But as he sat behind his desk and pulled up the schematics of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a mistake born of a desire to see her smile. He dialed Bruno again. Change of plans, Luca said, his voice like ice. She's going to the hospital tomorrow. I want the ghost team active. I want eyes on every doctor, every janitor, every delivery truck. If anyone who smells like olive oil and gunpowder steps within a mile of that hospital, I want them put in the ground. It's risky, boss, Bruno warned. I know, Luca whispered, looking through the glass door at Vanessa laughing with her daughter. But she needs to fly, so we will be the net. The sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the penthouse. To Vanessa, the sunset looked like a painting of freedom. To Luca, it looked like blood spreading across the sky. He checked his gun in the holster, ensuring a round was chambered. The war was coming, and tomorrow, he was letting his heart walk right onto the battlefield. The pediatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital smelled of antiseptic, floor wax, and the faint, sweet scent of bubblegum fluoride. To most people, it was a smell that induced anxiety, a reminder of illness and fragility. To Vanessa Grant, it was the perfume of normalcy. It was the scent of the one place in the world where she knew the rules, where she had authority, and where her actions directly resulted in healing rather than survival. She walked down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. She was wearing her favorite blue scrubs, the ones with the cartoon whales on the pocket, and her ID badge was clipped securely to her chest. Outwardly, she was Nurse Grant, the senior shift lead who could find a vein in a dehydrated infant on the first try. Inwardly, she was a woman vibrating with a frequency of terror so high it felt like a hum in her teeth. You're doing great, Van, she whispered to herself, adjusting the stethoscope around her neck. Just a shift. 8 hours. Then back to the fortress. She glanced toward the waiting room at the end of the hall. A man was sitting there, reading a magazine about golf. He was wearing a beige corduroy jacket and generic jeans. He looked like a bored father waiting for a tonsillectomy consultation. But Vanessa knew better. He was the Shadow, a man named Elias whom Luca had introduced to her that morning. Elias didn't look at her, but she knew he clocked her every movement. Every time she turned a corner, he shifted his position. Every time a delivery person entered the floor, Elias's hand drifted imperceptibly toward his waist. It was suffocating. It was necessary. The morning had been a blur of routine. Handover rounds, medication distribution, updating charts. Vanessa threw herself into the work with a desperate hunger. She checked temperatures, soothed crying toddlers, and joked with the exhausted parents. For hours, she managed to forget about the penthouse, the debt, and the man with the dark eyes who was currently paying for her safety. She managed to forget Daniel, but the fear was a patient predator. It waited for the quiet moments. At 11:30 a.m., the ward quieted down for lunch. The doctors retreated to their offices, and the hum of activity slowed. Vanessa felt the adrenaline crash hitting her. Her hands, steady as rocks while inserting an IV, began to tremble slightly when she reached for a pen. "Hey, Vanessa," Sarah, one of the junior nurses, called out from the station. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Go take a break. I'll cover the desk." "I'm fine, Sarah," Vanessa lied, forcing a smile. "You're pale, and you've checked the emergency exit sign 4 times in the last hour," Sarah noted gently. "Go. Get coffee. Sit down for 10 minutes. Vanessa nodded, realizing her paranoia was leaking out. "Okay, 10 minutes." She signaled to Elias in the waiting room. A subtle tug on her earlobe, the signal Luca had taught her. Elias nodded almost imperceptibly and stood up, meandering down the hall toward the vending machines near the break room. He was good. He was invisible. The break room was a small, windowless box tucked away near the service elevators. It contained a round table, a flickering fluorescent light, and a coffee machine that produced a sludge that tasted like battery acid. It was empty. Vanessa walked in and exhaled, leaning back against the closed door for a second. She fished her phone out of her pocket. No messages from Luca. Just a blank screen. She pressed the side button to ensure it was working. The panic button app he had installed was right there on the home screen, a red icon that looked like a shield. "Press it if anything feels wrong," he had said. Vanessa's thumb hovered for half a heartbeat. Then she tapped the red shield once, silent, deliberate, and locked her phone before sliding it back into her pocket. No siren, no light show. Just a single muted vibration against her palm. Everything feels wrong, she thought. My ex-husband is being hunted by the mob, and I'm living in a penthouse with a crime lord. She pushed off the door and went to the counter. She needed caffeine. She needed to wake up and finish this shift so she could go back to Lily. As the coffee machine gurgled and hissed, the door to the break room opened. Vanessa didn't turn immediately. Coffee's fresh, but it still smells like burnt rubber, she joked, assuming it was Sarah or Dr. Evans. There was no laughter, no response. Just the sound of the door clicking shut and the distinct snick of the lock turning. Vanessa's blood froze. The lock on the break room door had been broken for 6 months. You had to jiggle it violently to get it to engage. Whoever had just locked it had done so with a key or a very specific tool. She turned slowly, her hand instinctively going to her pocket where she kept her trauma shears and a small sealed scalpel she had confiscated from a tray earlier, a habit she had picked up when living with Daniel. 2 men stood in the room. They were dressed in scrubs, green surgical scrubs, generic and crisp. They wore surgical masks pulled down under their chins, revealing faces that were utterly forgettable. Average height, average build, brown hair. They looked like agency nurses sent to fill a staffing gap. But Vanessa was a nurse. She spent 12 hours a day looking at people in scrubs. And she saw the errors instantly. The man on the left was wearing a watch, a heavy gold Rolex that caught the flickering light. Nurses didn't wear heavy metal watches. They harbored bacteria and scratched patients. The man on the right was looking at the coffee machine with confusion, as if he had never seen a communal pot before. But it was their shoes that made Vanessa's stomach drop through the floor. Nurses wore Hokas, Danskos, Brooks, shoes designed for 12 hours of standing on concrete. Shoes that were ugly, functional, and rubber-soled. These men were wearing leather loafers. Expensive, Italian leather loafers with hard soles. The kind of shoes that cost $1,000 and offered 0 arch support. "Can I help you?" Vanessa asked, her voice steady despite the screaming in her head. "This is a staff-only area. The agency orientation is on the 3rd floor." The man with the Rolex smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had cornered a rabbit. "We aren't with the agency, Mrs. Grant," he said. His accent was faint, but it was there. European, not the rough, slurred speech of Daniel's gambling buddies. This was precise. "It's Ms. Grant," Vanessa corrected, her fingers wrapping around the handle of the scalpel in her pocket. "And if you aren't agency, you need to leave. Security is just outside." The man in the corduroy jacket? The second man spoke up, his voice bored. "He's currently dealing with a cardiac event in the waiting room. A very sudden, very fatal overdose. He won't be joining us." Vanessa felt the room spin. Elias. They had killed Elias, or incapacitated him. This wasn't Daniel. Daniel was a thug who threw lamps. These men were operators. "What do you want?" Vanessa asked, backing up until her hips hit the counter. The coffee pot was behind her, steaming hot. "We want the book," Rolex said, taking a step forward. "The ledger your husband stole. We know you have it. We know Santoro has you. So, we're going to take you, and then Santoro is going to give us the book to get you back. Simple geometry." "I don't know what you're talking about," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "I don't have a book. Daniel is a liar. He doesn't have anything." "Everyone has a price," the man said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a syringe. "We can do this quietly, Vanessa. You walk out with us. We say you felt sick. Or we can do it the hard way." Vanessa didn't think. She didn't weigh the options. The lizard brain that had kept her alive through 2 years of domestic abuse took over. She grabbed the pot of coffee. It was full. It was scalding. She didn't hesitate. She swung the glass carafe with all her strength, splashing the boiling liquid in a wide arc directly at their faces. The man on the right screamed, clutching his eyes as the hot liquid seared his skin. The carafe shattered against his shoulder, spraying glass and coffee everywhere. Rolex was faster. He ducked, taking the liquid on his arm, but the distraction bought Vanessa a second. She didn't run for the door. They were blocking it. She ran for the other exit. the service door that led to the linen chute and the back stairwell. It was usually locked from the outside, but she had a master key card. "Get her!" Rolex shouted, shaking the coffee off his arm. Vanessa swiped her badge. Red light. Denial. "Damn it!" she screamed, swiping again. Rolex lunged. He grabbed her scrub top, yanking her back. Vanessa spun around, the scalpel already in her hand. She slashed out blindly, a desperate, feral strike. The blade caught him on the forearm, slicing through the surgical scrub and into the skin. He hissed in pain and released her, looking at the blood welling up with genuine surprise. "You bitch," he growled. The fire alarm exploded into life. It wasn't just a siren. It was a deafening, strobing assault on the senses. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The sprinklers didn't go off, but the emergency lights began to flash. Luca. Vanessa knew it instantly. He was watching. He had seen the panic button activation. Or he was watching the cameras. The noise disoriented the men for a fraction of a second. Vanessa kicked the man with the burned face in the knee, hard, and swiped her card again. Green light. She threw herself through the heavy metal door and slammed it shut, engaging the deadbolt from the inside just as a heavy body slammed against it. She was in the service corridor. It was dark, smelling of dirty laundry and dust. It was under renovation, a maze of plastic tarps and exposed drywall. "Think, Vanessa, think," she panted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't go down to the street. They would have a car waiting. She couldn't go back to the ward. She would lead them to the children. The door behind her shook. They were kicking it in. She ran. She sprinted down the corridor, dodging stacks of drywall and buckets of paint. She needed a weapon. She needed help. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from Luca. "Roof, now." The roof. It was 4 floors up. Vanessa hit the stairwell door and burst inside. She didn't look down. She started climbing, taking the steps 2 at a time. Her legs burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. She heard the service door crash open below her. Footsteps echoed on the concrete stairs. Fast. Heavy. "She's in the stairwell," a voice echoed up. Vanessa scrambled up the 2nd flight. 3rd flight. She could hear them gaining on her. They were faster, stronger. She fumbled in her pocket for the pepper spray she had transferred from her purse. It was a small canister, meant for aggressive dogs, not hitmen. She reached the landing for the roof access. The door was marked, "Alarm will sound." The alarm was already sounding. She hit the panic bar. Locked. "No," she sobbed, throwing her weight against it. "No, no, no." It was a security door. It needed a key. Or a code. The footsteps were right below her now. She spun around, back against the steel door, holding the scalpel in one trembling hand and the pepper spray in the other. Rolex appeared on the landing below. He was bleeding from his arm, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. He held a gun now, a pistol with a long suppressor attached to the barrel. "End of the line, nurse." He spat, raising the weapon. Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of Lily. She thought of the dollhouse. She thought of Luca's dark eyes in the kitchen. "I'm sorry." The door behind her clicked. It didn't just unlock. It was thrown open with such force that the suction nearly pulled Vanessa off her feet. A hand, large, strong, and wearing a black leather glove, grabbed the back of her scrubs and yanked her backward into the biting cold air of the roof. Vanessa stumbled, falling onto the gravel surface of the roof. Luca Santoro stepped past her, moving into the doorway she had just vacated. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a tactical vest over a black sweater, and he was holding a weapon that looked far too large for a civilian setting. Rolex, still on the stairs, looked up. His eyes widened. He raised his gun. Luca didn't hesitate. He didn't speak. He fired twice. The sounds were sharp cracks, swallowed by the wind and the fire alarm echoing from the building. Rolex crumpled backward, tumbling down the stairs. The second man, the one with the burned face, appeared behind him. Luca fired once. Center mass. The threat was neutralized in less than 3 seconds. Luca stepped back and kicked the heavy steel door shut, engaging the locking mechanism. He turned to Vanessa. For a moment, he looked terrifying. His face was a mask of cold violence, his eyes dark voids. He looked like the monster the city whispered about. Then he saw her. He saw the coffee stains on her scrubs, the scalpel clutched in her white-knuckled hand, the terror etched into her face. The mask shattered. "Vanessa!" he choked out, dropping the weapon to his side on its sling and rushing to her. He fell to his knees on the gravel, ignoring the sharp stones, and grabbed her face in both hands. His gloves were cold, but his touch was frantic, searching. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Tell me where you are hurt." Vanessa couldn't speak. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She dropped the scalpel. I burned him with the coffee. I didn't mean to. You did exactly what you had to do," Luca said fiercely, his thumbs wiping away a tear that had escaped her eye. "You fought. You were brilliant." He pulled her into his chest. It was like hitting a wall of muscle and Kevlar. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, burying his face in her neck. She could feel his heart hammering against her ribs, a chaotic, frantic rhythm that matched her own. He wasn't calm. He was terrified. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I thought I could cover the exits. I thought I had the perimeter." "Who were they?" Vanessa gasped, pulling back to look at him. "Luca, those weren't debt collectors. They had guns with silencers. They knew about a book." Luca's jaw tightened. He looked away, toward the edge of the roof where a helicopter was descending, its rotors whipping up a storm of snow. "Come," he said, standing up and pulling her with him. "We are leaving. Now." "Who were they?" she screamed over the noise of the helicopter. Luca stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time, he gave her the full, unvarnished truth. "They were soldiers," he said, his voice hard as iron. "From the 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrese family. We are at war, Vanessa, and I just fired the first shots." He didn't give her time to process. He guided her toward the helicopter, shielding her body with his own as they ran under the spinning blades. Inside the cabin, it was loud and cramped. Luca strapped her in with efficient, trembling hands. He signaled the pilot, and the machine lifted off, banking sharply away from the hospital. Vanessa looked down. Police cars were swarming the entrance. Fire trucks were arriving. The hospital's alarm protocol had done what it was built to do: dispatch uniforms, lock down corridors, turn chaos into procedure. She had left her life down there. Her job, her normalcy. It was all gone, burned away by hot coffee and gunpowder. She looked at Luca. He was staring out the window, scanning the skyline, his hand resting on the weapon across his lap. He looked like a king going into exile, or a general going into a slaughter. "You knew," she said, her voice barely audible over the headset he had placed on her ears. "You knew it wasn't just Daniel." Luca turned to her. He didn't deny it. "I suspected. I didn't want it to be true." "You lied to me," she accused, tears finally spilling over. "You sent me into a trap." "I sent you with protection," Luca argued, his eyes flashing hurt. "Elias was the best." "Elias is dead," Vanessa shouted. "They said he was dead in the waiting room." Luca flinched. The news hit him visibly. He closed his eyes for a second, a silent mourning for his man. "Then I will pay his family 10 times his lifetime earnings. And I will kill every single person who gave the order." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was painful, desperate. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice rough. "I tried to give you what you wanted because I couldn't bear to be the one to cage you. I let my feelings compromise my judgment. That will never happen again." "Your feelings?" Vanessa asked, her breath catching. "My need to see you smile," Luca said, looking at her with an intensity that burned brighter than the city lights below. "It almost got you killed. So hate me, Vanessa. Hate me for lying. Hate me for the violence. But you are never leaving my sight again until every Calabrese is in the ground." Vanessa looked at their joined hands, his gloved in leather, hers shaking and stained with coffee. She should hate him. She should be terrified of him. He was a killer. He had just shot 2 men in a stairwell and didn't even blink. But he had come for her. He had kicked down a steel door and stood between her and death. "I don't hate you," she whispered, leaning her head back against the seat, exhaustion finally claiming her. "But I think I'm done with nursing." Luca let out a short, humorless laugh. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles, right over the spot where she had gripped the scalpel. "We'll find a new dream," he promised. "One that doesn't involve heavy artillery." The helicopter banked toward the waterfront, away from the penthouse. "Where are we going?" Vanessa asked. "Not the apartment. Too comprised," Luca said. "They know I have you. They know I intervened. The penthouse is a fortress, but it's a glass one. We are going to the safe house, the real one." "And Lily?" Vanessa sat up, panic flaring again. "Already there," Luca assured her instantly. "Bruno extracted her the moment the alarm triggered. She thinks she's on a surprise vacation. She's watching cartoons and eating gelato." Luca's phone vibrated once in his hand. A message from Bruno lit the screen. "Lily secure. Elias's family funded. Moving now." Vanessa slumped back. He had thought of everything. Even in his failure, he was more competent than anyone she had ever known. She looked out at the city. It looked different now. It wasn't just a place where she lived. It was a chessboard, and she was the queen that everyone wanted to capture. "What is the book?" she asked quietly. "The ledger they wanted." Luca looked at her, surprised she remembered the detail. "It's a list. Names, accounts, bribes, evidence that could dismantle the Ndrangheta's operations in New York. Daniel stole it to blackmail them. He didn't know what he was holding. He thought it was just leverage for a few grand. He didn't know he was holding a nuclear bomb. And they think I have it," Vanessa realized. "Yes. Do you have it?" Luca shook his head. "No. Daniel hid it too well. Or he lost it. Until we find Daniel, or the book, you are the only lead they have." "So I'm bait," she said bitterly. "No," Luca corrected her, his voice fierce. "You are the prize, and I don't share." The helicopter began its descent toward a large estate on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and dense forest. It looked cold, isolated, and safe. Vanessa closed her eyes. She had wanted a normal shift. She had wanted to be a nurse. Instead, she had become a survivor of a war she didn't understand. But as she felt Luca's thumb stroking the back of her hand, she realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a partner. She had fought back. She hadn't frozen. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to survive what was coming next. The Ndrangheta wanted a fight. They were about to find out that Vanessa Grant wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was the woman who stood next to the devil. And she had learned how to hold a scalpel. The dress lay on the bed like a pool of spilled wine. It was a deep, rich burgundy velvet, heavy and soft, catching the dim light of the safe house bedroom with a predatory gleam. It wasn't just a garment. It was a statement. It was the color of royalty, of power, and of blood. Vanessa Grant stood before it, wrapped in a towel, her hair still damp from the shower. The steam from the bathroom had faded, leaving the air cool and crisp, but her skin felt hot. 2 days had passed since the hospital attack. 2 days of hiding in this fortified estate surrounded by dense forest and armed guards. 2 days of watching Luca pace the hallways like a caged tiger, coordinating a war from his encrypted phone. Tonight, the Cold War would turn hot. She reached out and touched the fabric. It was cool against her fingertips. This was the armor Luca had chosen for her. Tonight was the Santoro Winter Gala, the most exclusive event on the city's social calendar. Usually, it was a night for charity and networking. Tonight, it was a trap. "Are you ready?" Vanessa turned. Luca was standing in the doorway. He was already dressed in a tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision. The black wool absorbed the light, making his white shirt and black bow tie pop in stark contrast. He looked devastatingly handsome, but it was the beauty of a weapon. Sleek, dark, and designed to end things. "I don't know," Vanessa admitted, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. Lily is asleep. Luca cut in gently, stepping into the room. Maria is with her. There are 2 guards outside her door and 1 on the balcony. The safe house is on lockdown. No one gets in or out until we return. She is safer here than she would be in the president's bunker. Vanessa exhaled, nodding. Okay, then I'm ready. You haven't put on the dress, Luca noted, his dark brown eyes sweeping over her form, with a heaviness that made her clutch the towel tighter. I was just looking at it. It's beautiful, Luca. But it's a lot. It needs to be, he said, walking over to the bed. He picked up the dress, the velvet draping over his large hands. Tonight, you are not hiding. For 2 years, you made yourself small to survive Daniel. You wore gray. You walked in the shadows. Tonight, we end that. Tonight, you walk into the lion's den wearing red, and you show them that you belong to the only lion that matters. He held the dress out to her. It was a challenge and a promise. Vanessa dropped the towel. She didn't shy away. She had seen the way he looked at her in the kitchen, the way he held her on the roof. Modesty felt like a relic from a past life. She stepped into the dress, pulling the heavy velvet up her body. It fit like a second skin, hugging her curves, the long sleeves elegant, the neckline plunging just enough to be daring without revealing too much. Luca stepped behind her. His hands brushed her bare back as he pulled the zipper up. The sound was a sharp hiss in the quiet room. He didn't pull away when it was done. He rested his hands on her shoulders, leaning down until his cheek brushed against her ear. You look like a queen, he whispered. My queen. Vanessa looked at their reflection in the mirror. The nurse in the scrubs was gone. The victim was gone. The woman staring back was dangerous. She wore the color of blood, and she stood next to the devil himself. Let's go catch a monster, she said. The drive to the city was silent. The armored limousine moved through the slushy streets like a shark through dark water. Vanessa sat next to Luca, her hand resting in his. His grip was firm, grounding. He was checking his phone periodically, reading messages that vanished as soon as he saw them. Vittorio is there, Luca said, breaking the silence as the city skyline rose up to meet them. He arrived 10 minutes ago. He thinks he's there to accept an award for Philanthropist of the Year. The irony is not lost on me. And the 'Ndrangheta? Vanessa asked. They are embedded. Waiters, valets, guests. They think they are the hunters tonight. They think I am weak because I have been hiding you. They think I will be distracted. Will you be? Luca turned to her. The passing streetlights illuminated the sharp angles of his face. Distracted? No. Motivated? Yes. When we walk through those doors, Vanessa, you stay on my left. Always on my left. That keeps my gun hand free. Vanessa nodded, glancing at the bulge under his jacket that was invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. What is the signal? I will ask you to dance, Luca said. The second dance, the waltz. That is when the trap springs. The car slowed. They had arrived. The venue was a massive, historic hotel in Midtown, its facade bathed in golden light. A red carpet stretched up the steps, flanked by shivering photographers and eager paparazzi. This was the public face of the Mafia. Legitimacy, wealth, glamour. The chauffeur opened the door. The cold air hit Vanessa instantly, biting at her exposed neck. But she didn't shiver. She channeled every ounce of strength she had left. Luca stepped out first. The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. He ignored them, buttoning his jacket, and turned to offer her his hand. Vanessa took it. She stepped out onto the red carpet. The reaction was immediate. A hush rippled through the press line, followed by a frantic increase in the clicking of shutters. The media knew Luca Santoro was a recluse. They knew he was single. Seeing him arrive with a woman, a stunning woman in burgundy velvet, was the scoop of the year. Keep your head up, Luca murmured, his voice barely moving his lips as he guided her forward. Look at them like you own the cameras. Look at them like you're bored. Vanessa lifted her chin. She thought of Daniel cowering in the parking lot. She thought of the men in the hospital stairwell. She wasn't afraid of cameras. Who is she? A reporter shouted. Mr. Santoro. A name. Luca didn't stop. He placed his hand on the small of her back. a possessive claim that the entire world could see. He guided her up the stairs, past the velvet ropes, and into the warmth of the grand ballroom. Inside, the noise of the city was replaced by the swell of a string quartet and the murmur of 1,000 wealthy voices. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. It smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and power. "Stay close," Luca said, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't looking at the decor. He was counting heads. He was identifying threats. Vanessa scanned the room, too. She saw men who looked like politicians, women who looked like models, and men who looked like sharks in human skin. "There," Luca whispered. Vanessa followed his gaze. Across the room, near the open bar, stood a man in a white tuxedo jacket. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was laughing, holding a glass of scotch, surrounded by sycophants. "Vittorio," Vanessa breathed. The man who had ordered the hit at the hospital. The man who wanted her dead because of a ledger she didn't have. "He looks comfortable," she noted with a surge of anger. "He thinks he has won," Luca said, his voice ice cold. "He thinks his sniper is in position on the north balcony. He thinks his men have secured the exits. He doesn't know that my men quietly removed his sniper 20 minutes ago. And he doesn't know that the waiter's pouring his scotch work for me. So we just wait? We wait. We mingle. We let him see you. We let him think his plan is working. He needs to believe you are exposed." They moved through the crowd. Luca introduced her simply as Vanessa. He didn't give a last name. He didn't explain. The mystery only added to the tension. Men shook Luca's hand with deferential fear. Women looked at Vanessa with jealous scrutiny. Vanessa played her part. She smiled. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't drink. She laughed softly at jokes she didn't hear, but her senses were dialed up to 11. She noticed the waiter who lingered too long near the pillar. She noticed the man by the curtains who wasn't drinking. "You're doing well," Luca murmured against her ear as they paused near a towering ice sculpture. "Better than well. You're natural." "I'm terrified," she whispered back, keeping her smile fixed. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." Suddenly the atmosphere shifted. Vittorio had seen them. The older man stopped laughing. He set his glass down. His eyes locked onto Vanessa across the room. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. He whispered something to the man beside him, and the man nodded and slipped away into the crowd. "He's initiating," Luca said, his muscles tensing under the suit. "He's giving the order." "Is it time?" Vanessa asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Almost. The band is changing tempo." The string quartet faded out, and a full orchestra began to play. The notes were slow, melodic, haunting, a waltz. "May I?" Luca extended his hand. This was it. The signal. Vanessa placed her hand in his. "Yes." He led her to the dance floor. They were the first couple to step out. The spotlight hit them, blindingly bright. For a moment, it was just the two of them in a circle of light, surrounded by darkness and danger. Luca pulled her close. His right hand gripped her waist firmly, his left holding hers up. They began to move. Luca danced the way he fought, with fluid, commanding precision. He led her effortlessly, spinning her through the steps. "Listen to me," Luca said, his voice low and intense as they turned. "In 60 seconds the lights will cut. When they do, you drop to the floor. Do not hesitate. You drop, and you crawl toward the exit behind the bandstand. I will cover you. I'm not leaving you." Vanessa whispered, tightening her grip on his shoulder. "You are not leaving me," Luca corrected. "You are moving to the extraction point. I will be right behind you. But I need to clear the path. Vittorio's men are going to rush the floor. What about the sniper?" "Neutralized, but he has a backup team inside. 4 men. I've marked 3. The 4th is a wild card." They spun again. The velvet of her dress swirled around her legs. Vanessa looked over Luca's shoulder. She saw the man Vittorio had whispered to. He was moving toward the edge of the dance floor, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "Luca, 3 o'clock, she hissed. "I see him." Luca said calmly. Keep dancing. Let him get closer. He's going to shoot. He's going to try. The music swelled. The crescendo was building. The tension in the room was palpable. The guests seemed to sense that something was wrong. The air was too thick, the smiles too brittle. Vanessa, Luca said, pulling her slightly closer, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting second. Whatever happens next, know that I bought that dollhouse. I bought the debt. And I would burn this entire city to keep you safe. Not because of the book, because of you. Vanessa's breath hitched. It was a confession in the middle of a battlefield. I know, she whispered. The music hit its peak. Click. The ballroom plunged into darkness. The blackout was absolute. A collective scream rose from the crowd, a wave of panic. Vanessa didn't scream. She dropped. She fell to her knees, the velvet dress cushioning the impact against the polished floor. Above her, the air exploded. Pop, pop, pop! Muzzle flashes illuminated the dark like strobe lights. It wasn't the sniper. It was Luca. He had drawn his weapon the instant the lights died. Vanessa scrambled on her hands and knees, moving toward the bandstand as instructed. The chaos was deafening. Guests were stampeding, glass was shattering, and the orchestra had abandoned their instruments. She looked back. In the strobe light flashes of gunfire, she saw Luca. He wasn't hiding. He was standing tall in the center of the floor, firing with cold precision at the shadows rushing him. He was a demon of vengeance in a tuxedo. Luca! She screamed, seeing a figure lunge at him from the side, the wild card. Luca spun, using his gun as a club to strike the attacker across the face, then kicked him away. He fired again, clearing the space. Go, Vanessa! Go! He roared, his voice cutting through the screams. She reached the edge of the bandstand. A hand reached out from the heavy velvet curtains behind the stage. Vanessa flinched, raising her arm to strike, but a familiar voice hissed. It's Bruno. Mrs. Grant, come with me. Bruno, Luca's head of security, pulled her behind the curtain. The backstage area was dimly lit by emergency red lights. Where is Luca? Vanessa demanded, trying to pull away. He's right behind us. Move. We have to get to the loading dock. Phase 2 is active. Vanessa ran, lifting the heavy skirts of her dress. They burst through the rear exit doors into the freezing alleyway behind the hotel. The cold air hit her sweat-dampened skin like a physical blow. A black sports car, low, sleek, and aggressive, skidded around the corner and screeched to a halt in front of them. The passenger door flew open. Get in! Bruno shouted, shoving her toward it. Vanessa scrambled into the low seat. The engine was roaring like a trapped beast. A second later, the rear door of the hotel banged open again. Luca burst out. He was breathing hard, his tie undone, his gun still in his hand. He didn't look back at the chaos he had left inside. He sprinted for the car, vaulting into the driver's seat. Are you hit? He demanded, looking at her immediately. No, you? No. He slammed the car into gear. Vittorio is down, but his lieutenants are still standing. They will be chasing. Is this phase 2? Vanessa asked, gripping the dashboard as Luca floored the accelerator, the tires smoking against the asphalt. Phase 2, Luca confirmed, his eyes checking the rearview mirror where headlights were already appearing. We draw them out. We lead them away from the guests, away from the civilians. We take them to the killing ground. The warehouse, Vanessa realized. The warehouse, Luca agreed. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it once before returning it to the wheel. You looked beautiful, Vanessa, even crawling on the floor. Vanessa let out a breathless, hysterical laugh. You know how to show a girl a good time, Santoro. Luca smirked, a flash of white teeth in the dark car. The night is young. He drifted the car around a corner, the G-force slamming Vanessa against the door. Behind them, 3 SUVs peeled out of the alley, their engines screaming in pursuit. The gala was over. The hunt had begun. Vanessa looked at her dress. The hem was stained with grease from the floor, and the velvet was torn. It didn't look like a queen's gown anymore. It looked like battle gear. And as she watched Luca navigate the city streets at 100 miles an hour, leading the wolves into his trap. She realized she wouldn't have it any other way. "They're gaining," she noted, watching the lights in the mirror. "Let them," Luca said softly. "They need to feel like they can catch us. That's the only way they'll follow us into the dark." He shifted gears, the car surging forward into the snowy night, leaving the glamour of the ballroom far behind. Ahead lay the industrial district, the warehouse, and the end of the line for the men who had dared to threaten what belonged to Luca Santoro. The engine of the sports car roared like a dying dragon, a mechanical scream that vibrated through the chassis and straight into Vanessa's bones. The city lights had long since faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the desolate, flickering sodium lamps of the industrial district. Here, the snow didn't look like a Christmas decoration. It looked like ash, coating the rusting skeletons of abandoned factories and shipping containers. "They are still with us," Luca said, his voice terrifyingly calm over the noise of the engine. He glanced at the side mirror, his eyes narrowing. 3 cars. They are aggressive. Vanessa gripped the door handle until her knuckles turned white. She twisted in her seat to look back. 3 pairs of blinding LED headlights were cutting through the darkness, weaving in and out of the lane, closing the distance. These weren't the police. These were wolves, chasing a wounded deer. "I thought we were leading them to a trap," Vanessa shouted over the roar of the tires on the slick asphalt. "This feels like we're just running." "We are positioning," Luca corrected, jerking the steering wheel sharply to the left. The car drifted, the rear tires catching the slush and sliding perilously close to a concrete barrier before gripping again. "My men are 5 minutes out. We have to hold them here until the hammer drops. 5 minutes is a long time when people are shooting at you." As if on cue, the rear window shattered. The sound was explosive, a deafening crack that sent safety glass raining down onto the back seat. Vanessa screamed, ducking low, covering her head with her arms. The cold night air rushed into the cabin, bringing the smell of exhaust and gunpowder. "Stay down," Luca roared. He didn't flinch. He didn't duck. He kept his eyes on the road and his foot pinned to the floor. "Vanessa, get down in the footwell." She scrambled off the seat, curling herself into a ball in the tight space beneath the dashboard. The velvet of her dress, once a symbol of her queen-like entrance, was now just fabric tangling around her legs, stained with grease and glass shards. She felt the car swerve violently again, then a sickening metal-on-metal crunch as one of the pursuing SUVs tried to ram them from the side. "Hold on," Luca warned. He slammed on the brakes. It was a maneuver born of madness and precision. The SUV behind them, expecting a chase, couldn't react in time. It clipped the rear bumper of Luca's car, lost traction on the ice, and spun wildly out of control, slamming into a parked trailer with a sound like a bomb going off. But the maneuver cost them. Luca's car spun 180 degrees, sliding backward across the ice until it slammed into a loading dock ramp. The impact threw Vanessa against the glove compartment. The airbags didn't deploy. Luca must have disabled them for the tactical driving, but the force knocked the wind out of her. Silence returned for a split second, heavy and ringing. Then, the sound of doors opening, voices shouting in Italian, angry, violent voices. "Out," Luca commanded. He was already moving. He kicked his door open and rolled out, his gun raised. "Vanessa, move. The warehouse." Vanessa scrambled out of the passenger side. Her legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline was a powerful drug. She didn't look at the wreckage. She looked at the massive, rusting corrugated metal doors of the warehouse in front of them. A gunshot cracked through the air, hitting the pavement inches from her heels. "Run!" Luca shouted, firing back. He stood in the open, exposing himself to draw their fire away from her. Vanessa lifted her heavy skirts and sprinted. She hit the warehouse door, finding the small personnel entrance Luca had aimed for. It was locked. "Luca, it's locked." He was beside her in a second, breathing hard. He didn't fumble for keys. He raised his foot and kicked the lock mechanism with a force that would have shattered a normal man's ankle. The rusted metal groaned and gave way. He shoved the door open and pushed her inside, following her and slamming it shut, just as a hail of bullets pinged against the exterior steel. Inside, it was pitch black and freezing. The air smelled of old oil, dust, and decay. It was a cavernous space, filled with shadows and old machinery. "Barricade!" Luca ordered, his voice tight. Vanessa grabbed a heavy wooden pallet leaning against the wall and dragged it over. Luca helped her, shoving a rusted metal cabinet against the door. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy them seconds. "Are you okay?" Vanessa asked, turning to him in the gloom. The moonlight was filtering in through high, broken windows, cutting beams of blue light through the dust. "I'm fine," Luca said, but his voice was strained. Vanessa stepped closer. In the slice of moonlight, she saw it. The pristine white shirt of his tuxedo was no longer white on the left side. A dark spreading stain was soaking through the fabric, dripping down his sleeve. "You're hit," she gasped, reaching out. "It's a graze," Luca dismissed, trying to reload his weapon with one hand. "Just a scratch." "That is not a scratch, Luca." Vanessa's nurse training overrode her fear. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. "Sit down. Now. We don't have time." "Sit down or I will sedate you with a brick," she hissed, her blue eyes flashing. "You are bleeding out. You can't fight if you pass out from blood loss." Luca looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. The same fire that had made her throw boiling coffee at a hitman. He sat down on a crate, his face pale but composed. "Fix it fast," he said. "They are flanking. They will come through the loading bays in less than 3 minutes." Vanessa didn't waste words. She grabbed the lapel of his tuxedo jacket and ripped it open. The shirt was soaked. She tore the buttons off, exposing his shoulder. It was an ugly wound. A furrow dug by a bullet through the deltoid muscle. It wasn't arterial, thank God, but it was bleeding heavily and would limit his movement. "I need pressure," she muttered, scanning the dark room. There were no bandages, no first aid kits. She looked down at herself. The burgundy velvet dress. Without hesitation, she grabbed the slit of the skirt and ripped. The sound of expensive fabric tearing was loud in the quiet warehouse. She tore a long, thick strip from the hem, ruining the garment completely. She didn't care. It was just cloth. He was flesh and blood. She folded the velvet into a thick pad and pressed it directly onto the wound. Luca hissed through his teeth, his head tipping back against the wall, eyes squeezing shut. "Fuck." "Breathe," Vanessa commanded, her hands steady now that they had a job to do. "I need to tie this tight. It's going to hurt." "Do it." She ripped another strip and wrapped it around his shoulder, pulling it tight enough to cut off the circulation to the skin, but stop the bleeding. She tied it off with a savage knot. Her hands were covered in his blood. It was warm and sticky, a stark contrast to the freezing air. "There," she said, her voice shaking slightly now that the task was done. "It will hold, but you can't use that arm to shoot." Luca opened his eyes. He looked at the makeshift bandage, the red velvet now stained with a darker red. Then he looked at her. Her hair was wild, coming loose from its pins. Her face was smudged with dirt. Her dress was destroyed, hanging in tatters around her legs. He reached out with his good hand and touched her face. His thumb traced her lower lip. "I never wanted you to see this," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and something else. "Shame. I wanted to give you the penthouse, the dresses, the lights. I didn't want to drag you into the gutter with me." Vanessa covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "Luca, look around. We aren't in a gutter. We're in a fortress, and I'm not looking at a monster. I'm looking at the man who came for me when no one else would. I almost got you killed," he said, the guilt eating at him. "Tonight. The hospital. I am poison, Vanessa." "You're not poison," she said fiercely, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "You're the antidote. You saved me from a life that was killing me slowly. I would rather bleed with you in this warehouse than live another day safe in that apartment with Daniel." Luca stared at her, stunned by the ferocity of her loyalty. He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It tasted of copper, adrenaline, and desperation. It was a seal, a promise. Clang. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Luca broke the kiss instantly, the soldier returning to the surface. "They're inside." He stood up, testing his left arm. He winced but nodded. He checked the magazine of his gun. 2 rounds left. I have 1 spare clip. That's it. Where is Bruno? Vanessa asked, backing up against the crate. Close, but not close enough. Luca reached to the small of his back and pulled out a second weapon. A smaller, compact pistol he kept as a backup. He checked the safety and handed it to Vanessa. She stared at the gun. It was heavy, cold, and lethal. She had never held a gun in her life. She healed people. She didn't break them. Take it, Luca ordered. Safety is off. You point and you pull the trigger. Don't think about who they are. Think about Lily. Vanessa took the gun. Her hand trembled, then steadied. Lily. Okay, she whispered. Get behind those oil drums, Luca instructed, pointing to a stack of barrels near the center of the room. Keep your head down. Do not shoot unless they cross the yellow line on the floor. If they cross that line, you empty the clip. Understood? Understood. Luca moved away from her, heading toward the shadows on the right flank, drawing their attention. Vittorio sent boys to do a man's job, Luca shouted into the darkness, his voice echoing off the metal walls. Come out. Let's finish this. A burst of automatic gunfire answered him, sparks flying from the pillar Luca had just passed. He returned fire. 2 controlled shots. A scream echoed in the dark. Vanessa crouched behind the barrels, gripping the pistol with both hands. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a hummingbird trapped in her chest. She watched the darkness. She saw movement. To her left, while Luca was engaging the main group on the right, a shadow was creeping along the wall, heading toward his blind spot. A man in a dark tactical vest, moving silently. He had a shotgun. He was going to flank Luca. He was going to kill him. Vanessa didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The image of Lily opening her dollhouse flashed in her mind. The image of Luca bleeding on the crate. She stood up. Hey! She screamed. The shadow turned, surprised to see a woman in a tattered ball gown standing amidst the wreckage. Vanessa raised the gun. She didn't close her eyes. She aimed for the center of the mass, just like Luca had said. She pulled the trigger. The recoil jerked her arms up, shocking her. The gun barked loud and angry. The man grunted, spinning around as the bullet hit his shoulder. He dropped the shotgun, stumbling back. Vanessa, get down! Luca roared from across the room. The man scrambled for his weapon with his good hand. Vanessa fired again. The bullet hit the floor near his feet, but it was enough to make him scramble back into cover. I'm here, she shouted to Luca. I'm watching your back. Luca laughed, a short, dark, incredulous sound. That's my girl. But the situation was deteriorating. More shadows were pouring in. They were pinned down. Luca fired his last round from the main clip and slammed the spare in. We're out of time, Luca yelled. Vanessa, move back to the office. Go. No! Go! Suddenly, the warehouse doors, the massive loading bay doors at the far end, exploded inward. It wasn't a kick. It was a truck. A reinforced black armored truck smashed through the corrugated metal like it was paper, headlights blinding everyone in the room. The 'Ndrangheta gunman froze, blinded. The rear doors of the truck flew open. Bruno stepped out, holding an assault rifle. Behind him were 6 men in full tactical gear with the Santoro crest on their vests. Clear the room, Bruno ordered. The warehouse erupted in noise. It was a symphony of violence. The Santoro team moved with military efficiency, sweeping through the shadows. The 'Ndrangheta mercenaries didn't stand a chance. Within 30 seconds, the shooting stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Vanessa lowered the gun, her ears ringing. She stood up slowly from behind the barrels. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Clear, Bruno shouted. Luca emerged from the shadows. He was limping slightly, holding his wounded shoulder. But he was alive. He walked toward Vanessa. He didn't run this time. He walked with the heavy, inevitable stride of a man who had survived the end of the world. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the gun in her hand. He looked at the man she had shot, who was now being zip-tied by Bruno's men. You shot him, Luca said, sounding awestruck. He was going to hurt you, Vanessa said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. The adrenaline was crashing. Her knees felt weak. Luca took the gun from her hand gently, engaging the safety and tucking it into his belt. Then he pulled her into him with his good arm. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of gunpowder and perfume. "It's over," he whispered against her skin. "The Ndrangheta is broken. Vittorio is dead. His men are gone. It's over." Vanessa slumped against him, letting him take her weight. She wrapped her arms around his waist, careful of his wound. She felt the sticky wetness of his blood on her hands, but it didn't scare her anymore. It was just proof of life. "We need to get you to a doctor," she mumbled into his chest. "We have a medic team in the convoy," Luca said. He pulled back to look at her. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his eyes were clear. But first, he looked around the ruined warehouse, at the shattered glass, the bullet holes, the wreckage. Then he looked at her. Torn dress, messy hair, blood on her hands. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said. And he meant it. He didn't see a mess. He saw a survivor. He saw a queen who had forged her crown in fire. "I want to go home," Vanessa whispered. "Not the penthouse, not the safe house. I want to go. I just want to be with you and Lily. Home." Luca repeated the word like a vow. "Yes, let's go home." Bruno approached them, looking respectful but urgent. "Boss, we need to move. Police will be here in 10 minutes. The cleanup crew is inbound." "Let's go," Luca said. He guided Vanessa toward the armored truck. She stopped at the door and looked back one last time at the dark warehouse. She was leaving more than just a ruined dress in there. She was leaving the last of her fear. She had faced death. She had held a weapon. And she had stood her ground. She wasn't just the woman the mafia boss had saved anymore. She was the woman who had saved him back. "Vanessa?" Luca called from the truck, his hand outstretched. She took it. She climbed up into the safety of the armored vehicle, sitting next to him on the bench seat, as the truck rumbled to life and pulled out into the snowy night, leaving the carnage behind. Vanessa rested her head on Luca's uninjured shoulder. He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll wake you when we get there." "Where?" "To the beginning," Luca said. "The real beginning." The convoy moved out, a line of black steel cutting through the white snow, heading toward a Christmas morning that had been bought with blood and paid for with loyalty. The war was won. Now they just had to survive the peace. The morning sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse was not the harsh gray light of a winter storm. It was gold, brilliant and blinding, reflecting off the fresh layer of snow that coated the city like a pristine blanket. It was December 25th, Christmas morning. Vanessa Grant woke up slowly, her body heavy with the kind of deep, restorative sleep she hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, suspended between dreams and wakefulness, she panicked. Her hand shot out across the sheets, searching for the cold, empty space of her old mattress, waiting for the sound of Daniel's angry footsteps in the hallway, or the draft from the broken window. Instead, her hand brushed against silk sheets that felt like water. The air smelled of pine needles, roasting coffee, and expensive cologne. The silence wasn't threatening. It was absolute, guarded, and safe. She sat up, blinking against the light. She was alone in the massive bed, but the indentation on the pillow beside her proved she hadn't started the night that way. She pulled the duvet up to her chin, a blush heating her cheeks as memories of the last 2 days washed over her. The warehouse, the blood, the drive back, and then the quiet aftermath where they had simply held each other, too exhausted for passion, but too desperate for separation. "Luca," she whispered, though she knew he wasn't in the room. She slid out of bed, her feet sinking into the plush carpet. She grabbed the first thing she found, a white dress shirt draped over the velvet armchair. It was his. She slipped it on, the fabric swallowing her frame, the cuffs hanging past her fingertips. It smelled of him. Sandalwood, gunpowder, and the faint metallic tang of the antiseptic she had used to clean his wound. She walked out of the bedroom and down the long marble hallway. The penthouse, usually a monument to minimalism and cold luxury, had been transformed. It looked as if the North Pole had exploded in the living room. A tree, easily 12 feet tall, stood in the center of the room, its branches heavy with crystal ornaments, red ribbons, and twinkling white lights. Garlands of fresh holly draped the fireplace mantel. Stockings hung by the chimney, 3 of them. One embroidered with Luca, one with Vanessa, and a smaller one in the middle that said, Lily. Vanessa stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. 2 days ago, they had been bleeding in a freezing warehouse. Today, they were inside a Hallmark movie funded by a crime syndicate. Luca was sitting in the leather armchair near the window. He was wearing dark pajama pants and nothing else. His chest bare except for the heavy black sling that cradled his left arm. The white bandage on his shoulder stood out against his olive skin. He was holding a mug of coffee in his good hand, staring at the tree with a look of intense, brooding concentration, as if he were trying to calculate the structural integrity of the ornaments. You did this, Vanessa said softly, stepping into the room. Luca turned. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in the messy hair, the oversized shirt, and the bare legs. A flicker of heat ignited in his gaze, but he masked it quickly, replacing it with a guarded expression. My staff did this, he corrected, his voice raspy. I just authorized the expenditure. The elves work for a retainer. Vanessa smiled, walking over to him. She didn't hesitate. She sat on the wide arm of his chair, her hand resting gently on his uninjured shoulder. It's beautiful, Luca. Lily is going to lose her mind. Is she awake? Not yet. She sleeps like the dead when she's safe. Good. Luca took a sip of his coffee, his jaw tightening. Let her sleep. We need to talk before she wakes up. The tone of his voice sent a chill through Vanessa that had nothing to do with the winter air. It was the business voice. The voice he used when he was ordering Bruno to clear a room or buying a debt. Talk about what? Vanessa asked, her stomach twisting. About Daniel? About the Ndrangheta? Daniel is gone, Luca said flatly. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The past tense was final. The police found his body in a ditch in Jersey this morning. Drug deal gone wrong. A tragic overdose. Case closed. Vanessa exhaled long and unsteady, as if her body was finally letting go of an old, stubborn tension. Dead. The monster under her bed was dead. She waited for the grief, or the guilt. But there was nothing. Just a vast, empty space where the fear used to be. And the Ndrangheta? She asked. Broken, Luca said. The raid on the warehouse was decisive. We cut off the head of the snake. The remnants have fled back to Italy. You are safe, Vanessa. Truly safe. No one is looking for you. No one is hunting you. Okay, she said slowly, watching his face. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the snow falling outside. That sounds like good news. So why do you look like you're about to fire me? Luca set the coffee mug down on the side table with a sharp click. He reached into the pocket of his pajama pants and pulled out a long, rectangular velvet box. It wasn't a ring box. It was too long for that. He held it out to her. His hand was steady, but his knuckles were white. Open it. Vanessa took the box. Her fingers trembled slightly. She opened the lid. Inside, resting on the black satin, was a heavy iron key and a folded stack of legal documents. What is this? She whispered. Freedom, Luca said. He shifted in the chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. That is the deed to a house in Connecticut. 4 bedrooms, big yard, good school district. It is fully furnished and paid for in your name. The taxes are prepaid for 20 years. He pointed to the papers. And that is a trust fund for Lily. It has enough money to ensure she never has to ask Santa for food again. She can go to college. She can travel. She can do whatever she wants. Vanessa stared at the contents of the box. It was a fortune. It was the escape hatch she had dreamed of every night she lay awake in her old apartment. It was a clean slate. I don't understand, she said, looking up at him. Are you sending us away? Luca finally looked at her. His eyes were dark pools of pain. I am giving you a choice, a real choice. When we met at the mall, you were desperate. You didn't choose me. You grabbed the only lifeline that was thrown to you. You needed protection. You needed money. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You have those things now. The threat is gone. You don't need the monster anymore. Monster? Vanessa repeated, her voice rising. Look at me, Vanessa. Luca snapped, gesturing to his sling, to the bruises on his ribs, to the invisible weight of the violence he carried. I am a man who kills people. I am a man who starts wars in warehouses. 2 days ago, you had to shoot a man to save my life. You had blood on your hands. My blood. His blood. He looked away, shame coloring his features. I never wanted that for you. I wanted to be your hero, not your corruptor. You are a nurse. You heal people. I break them. If you stay here, if you stay with me, that violence will always be a shadow in the corner. You can take that key, Vanessa. You can take Lily and go to Connecticut and live a normal, safe, beautiful life where no one shoots at you. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Vanessa looked at the key. It was heavy, cool metal. It represented safety, normalcy, the life she was supposed to want. Then she looked at Luca. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way he was bracing himself for her to leave, as if he had already accepted that he wasn't good enough to keep her. She saw the boy from chemistry class who had been shocked that someone would help him with a cut. She saw the man who had bought a dollhouse because a little girl asked for a father. She closed the velvet box with a soft snap. Luca flinched, as if the sound was a gunshot. The car is waiting downstairs. Bruno will drive you whenever you are. Vanessa stood up. She walked over to the fireplace, where a cheerful fire was crackling behind the grate. Vanessa? Luca asked, confusion clouding his face. She tossed the velvet box into the fire. Luca surged out of the chair, ignoring his injury. Vanessa, what are you doing? That is... I know what it is, she interrupted, turning to face him, her eyes blazing with a blue fire that matched the intensity of the flames. It's a severance package, and I don't accept it. It's not a severance package, it's a life, Luca shouted, closing the distance between them. It's safety. Why would you burn safety? Because it's not my life, she shouted back, stepping into his space, grabbing the lapels of his shirt that she was wearing. My life isn't in Connecticut, Luca. My life is here. With you. I am dangerous. He growled, looking down at her, his body trembling with the effort to not grab her. I will always be dangerous. So am I, Vanessa said fiercely. I shot a man, Luca. I didn't freeze. I didn't cry. I pulled the trigger because he was threatening my family. You think I can go back to being a normal suburban mom after that? You think I want to? She softened her grip, her hands sliding up to cup his face. The stubble on his jaw scratched her palms. You said I didn't choose you, she whispered. You said I just grabbed a lifeline. Maybe that was true at the mall. But I'm not at the mall anymore. I'm standing in your living room, wearing your shirt, staring at the Christmas tree you put up for my daughter. She rose on her tiptoes, forcing him to look her in the eye. I know exactly who you are, Luca Santoro. You are the man who remembers a tissue from 15 years ago. You are the man who sat in a freezing car to watch my back. You are the man who bleeds, so I don't have to. She kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It was acclaiming. I don't want the key to a house in Connecticut, she murmured against his lips. I want the key to this penthouse. And I want the man who comes with it. Luca let out a sound that was half groan, half sob. His resistance shattered. His good arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the floor, crushing her against him. He pressed his forehead to her shoulder, breathing her in like a prayer he didn't deserve. I love you, he choked out, the words torn from the deepest part of him. I have loved you since I was 16 years old. I tried to let you go. I tried to be noble. Don't ever try to be noble again, Vanessa said, tears pricking her eyes. Just be mine. I am, he vowed. Yours, forever. No matter what comes for us, we fight it together. Together, she agreed. Mommy? Luca? The small voice from the hallway made them freeze. Luca set Vanessa down gently, though he didn't let go of her waist. They turned toward the corridor. Lily was standing there, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was wearing her cloud pajamas, her hair a messy halo around her head. She blinked, looking at the scene before her. The massive tree, the mountain of gifts, the fire crackling in the grate. Her eyes went wide, the size of saucers. Her mouth formed a perfect O. Santa came, she whispered, awestruck. Luca smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face, erasing the shadows of the 'ndrangheta and the pain of his wound. He stepped away from Vanessa and knelt down on one knee, ignoring the strain it put on his body. He opened his good arm. "Come here, Piccolina," he called out softly. Lily didn't walk. She ran. She sprinted across the Persian rug and launched herself into Luca's arm. He caught her effortlessly, swinging her up against his chest, holding her tight. "Look," she squealed, pointing at the tree. "Look at the lights. It's magic." "It is magic," Luca agreed, looking not at the tree, but at Vanessa. "The best kind." Lily wiggled to get down, her eyes locking onto the pile of presents. She ran to the tree, vibrating with excitement. She picked up a box wrapped in gold paper that was bigger than her head. She looked back at them, hesitating. "Is it for me?" she asked. "Read the tag," Vanessa said, leaning against Luca's side, his arm immediately coming around to hold her. "Lily," the girl sounded out. "It's mine! Open it," Luca commanded, laughing. For the next hour, the penthouse was filled with the sounds of tearing paper, delighted squeals, and the crinkle of plastic packaging. Lily got the dollhouse accessories. She got the art set. She got the winter coat that looked like a princess robe. She got things Vanessa couldn't have afforded in 1,000 years. But amidst the chaos of consumerism, Vanessa noticed something. Every time Lily opened a gift, she didn't just look at the toy. She looked at Luca. She checked to see if he was watching, and every time, he was. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't brooding. He was present. Finally, the frenzy slowed. Lily was sitting amidst a sea of wrapping paper, holding a new stuffed polar bear. She looked tired but deliriously happy. She looked at Luca, who was sitting on the floor with his back against the sofa, his legs stretched out. She crawled over to him, navigating the debris of Christmas morning. She stood in front of him, looking very serious. "Thank you, Luca," she said politely. "You are welcome, Lily," he replied, dipping his head. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She looked at Vanessa, then back at Luca. "Santa listened," she said. "He did?" Luca asked. "Yes." She pointed to the toys. "He brought the toys." "He did, but I asked for the other thing too," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Remember? At the mall?" Luca went very still. Vanessa felt her heart stop. "I remember," Luca said, his voice thick. "He said he couldn't do it." Lily continued, frowning slightly. "The Santa at the mall. He said he only had toys. But you said—" She trailed off, stepping closer until she was standing between Luca's knees. She reached out and touched the black sling holding his arm. "You got a boo-boo," she observed. "I did," Luca admitted. "It's getting better. Mommy says brave boys don't cry," she told him. "Your mommy is right." Lily nodded. Then, with the devastating simplicity of a child who has made up her mind, she climbed onto his lap. She nestled her head against his good shoulder, settling in as if she belonged there. As if she had always belonged there. "I'm glad you fixed it," she mumbled, closing her eyes, exhausted from the excitement. "Fixed what?" Luca whispered, resting his chin on the top of her head. "The wish," Lily yawned. "You make a good daddy?" The word hung in the air, fragile and absolute. "Daddy," Luca froze. He looked up at Vanessa, his eyes wide, shining with unshed tears. The man who had faced down hitmen, who had ordered executions, who had run an empire of crime, looked completely undone by one word from a 5-year-old. He tightened his hold on the little girl. He buried his face in her hair. "I will try," he whispered into the silence, his voice cracking. "I promise, Lily. I will try to be the best one." Vanessa walked over and sat down beside them on the floor, wrapping her arms around both of them. She kissed Luca's wet cheek. She kissed Lily's forehead. "You don't have to try," Vanessa whispered to him. You already are. Later that afternoon, after a breakfast of pancakes that Luca insisted on helping to cook one-handed, resulting in a lot of flour on the floor, they stood on the balcony. Lily was napping on the sofa inside, guarding her hoard of treasures. The snow was still falling, large, soft flakes drifting down from the gray sky. The city stretched out below them, white and silent. Luca stood behind Vanessa, his good arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. His coat was draped over her shoulders again, just like that first night on the roof of the mall. But this time she wasn't shivering. This time, she wasn't looking for the exit. "Are you happy?" Luca asked quietly, resting his cheek against her temple. Vanessa looked out at the skyline. She thought about the key she had thrown in the fire. She thought about the danger that would always be a part of this life. She knew there would be other enemies, other wars, other scars, but she also felt the solid beat of his heart against her back. She felt the warmth of his protection. She felt the love that had survived 15 years of silence. "I have a daughter who is safe," she said. "I have a home that isn't falling apart. And I have the man I love." She turned in his arms, careful of his shoulder, and looked up at him. "I'm not just happy, Luca. I'm home." Luca smiled, and this time it touched his eyes, banishing the last of the winter chill. He leaned down and kissed her. A slow, deep kiss that tasted of coffee and forever. "Merry Christmas, Vanessa." "Merry Christmas, boss." Below them, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, illuminating the snow. But up here, in the penthouse at the top of the world, the only light that mattered was the one they had kindled between them. A wish made in desperation, granted in violence, and sealed with love. The little girl had asked for a daddy. The woman had asked for safety. And the mafia boss, against all odds, had delivered both. Wish granted.